Hello and welcome. I am Sharon Young, President of the Global Housing Foundation. The Global Housing Foundation unites global partners across public, private, academic, and community sectors. We accelerate innovative housing solutions that strengthen communities, supports the vulnerable populations, and advance the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. We want to thank you for joining us for today's program. It is now my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Pulitzer Prize award winning journalist, Ellis Hennigan.
Unless you have decent housing, almost nothing else matters. One of the lessons we keep learning over and over again at the Global Housing Foundation. I'm Ellis Hennigan, your host today. So happy to have you along. We have a series of fascinating conversations to come as we wrestle with some of the toughest and most fascinating issues in the realm of housing all around the world. Sustainable Futures, we're calling this one. Global Housing Innovation, Advancing United Nations Development Goals. The only way I know how to do this is to gather together some of the world's most creative thinkers on these issues and really probe them, ask them the toughest questions we can generate about what kind of solutions seem most promising, why are these issues so persistent, and how can we harness the power of politics and the energy of everyday people to try and find some actual, workable, doable, practical solutions? And along the way, if we can empower people around the globe to take more and more responsibility and to gather more and more benefits from the results of these housing developments, oh, we'll have a lot to show for our efforts. So hang on tight now. We have an array of guests coming up, everyone from creative architects to city planners to people in some of the furthest flung corners of the globe, dealing in a very ground level way with solving some of the most persistent and nagging problems in the realm of housing. Everybody knows what the problem is. A whole lot of people are having trouble securing the housing that they want and need. And it's not just poor people. I mean, people up and down the economic ladder today are finding it hard to find the housing that they need. And the fact that it doesn't only involve the world's poorest has certainly shined a spotlight on an issue that has lingered for a long time, but is now affecting more and more people here at the Global Housing Foundation. Of course, we tend to focus on the neediest citizens of the world. But as this problem has spread, interest in it has grown, creative solutions have presented themselves, and the conversation has gotten a whole lot more complex, but also a whole lot more creative, and I like to think a bit richer. I'm very excited about our guest in this segment. Kent Larson is an architect, a professor of practice at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and he also directs the City Science at the MIT Media Lab. Kent, good of you to spend some time with us.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Looking
So,
forward to our
so why don't
conversation.
let's divide this into two pieces, if you don't mind. Let's
Sure.
talk about the problem a minute, how it is we got here, why it's so difficult. And then the part that I'm really interested in is poking you for what you see as some of the more interesting and creative and doable, I've got to emphasize doable solutions
hmm
there. I know you use the term polycrisis. Now
hmm
it's been a few years since my high school Latin classes, but if
hmm
I remember correctly, the word poly means many. So what are
hmm
you thinking of when you say housing is a polycrisis?
I call housing a polycrisis because there's no single source of the problem. It's a convergence of many, many different problems that have evolved over many years. And I'll just list a few of them. First of all, there's this artificial land scarcity that is created by restrictive zoning and restrictive building codes and tax policies like Prop 13 in California that incentivizes owners to hang on to their land. So the supply of land in many cities is very low, which means the prices are high. We have uh, really extreme construction costs due to high labor costs and the seismic requirements, energy requirements, et cetera. We need to figure out ways to deal with that. We have a permitting system that's built on delay and distrust. You've got many, many reviews. Sometimes it takes 3 years to you get even a small housing project approved, and that adds sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars in soft costs and uncertainty and risk. Actually raises the internal rate of return that developers look for in order to commit to building. We have mandates that require compliance with all kinds of, energy requirements and using local labor and et cetera. All of these things good on their own and put in place with the best of intentions, but together they create this perfect storm of unviability where all these things come together and just make housing too expensive to build, and collectively that's led to this problem.
So, am I right when I say that this crisis of housing is affecting a broader part of society? I can't tell you how many friends of mine, and I bet you've got some friends like this too,
Mm-hmm.
well off people
Yeah.
whose kids are still living in the basement in their 30s and 40s because they can't afford to move out of the house.
No, they can't afford to. I mean, yeah, it's a real challenge, and we're working closely with San Francisco, with the mayor's office, the Department of the planning department, and they see it as an existential threat because it's one of the most innovative places on the planet. The center of AI development, et cetera. But even fairly well-paid young professionals, can't afford to live in the city, and companies are leaving for more affordable areas. So, same is true in Boston here. So, I think we have to fix this problem. It's not just that housing is unaffordable for the less affluent. Increasingly, it's unaffordable for the more affluent that weren't lucky enough to buy housing when it was affordable, 15, 20, 30 years ago.
And I notice as well that as these questions have become closer to the center of the political stage, I mean, politicians left and right are all obviously focusing on this and
Yeah.
promising solutions, but damn, it's taken a long time, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I think most of the solutions that come from politicians, particularly at the federal government, just aren't workable. And they're not applicable to, the issues that constrain housing, which are mostly local issues. Just give you two examples from the last presidential campaign. Trump proposed to use government property to build housing, but this is remote from where the demand is, from where the infrastructure is. It lead to longer commutes and more strain on the infrastructure. On the other hand, Kamala Harris proposed to give first-time homeowners $25,000, but that can increase the demand, which would raise prices and probably wipe out the value of that $25,000 subsidy. So I look to the mayors. I believe in the mayors. The mayors have their finger on the pulse of the problems, and the good mayors, and there are many good mayors in this country, are all now trying to find solutions, and they particularly now realize they have to step up. They can't find the solutions from top-down federal government. They have to find these bottom-up community scale solutions.
So, if we can agree that this is a crisis, that it is affecting more and more people in our society, that there is no magic bullet, no one solution that's going to pull us out of this mess. Where do the solutions lie? Are we talking about picking an option from the cafeteria of possibilities that you laid out a moment ago? Is there some kind of creative way we can begin these discussions? How do you think about all of this?
Yeah. Well, I think we have to start with how we got here. So first of all, there is artificial land scarcity, and that's many reasons for that. Zoning limits what can get built. Building codes limit cities to build small infill, um, housing projects in that's community scale. Proposition 13 in California, for example, rewards owners for holding on to land. So that just raises the cost of land. That's a huge driver. We have escalating construction costs. The high demand cities, incredibly expensive to build, in large part due to high labor costs and the requirements to use union labor and meet, energy requirements, et cetera, all implemented with good intentions, but collectively they raise the construction cost. Permitting is in some cities take 2 or 3 years to get even a small housing project permitted. I think we could probably do that in weeks, within a few years. You have mandates, inclusionary housing mandates to build, apartments for people that are less affluent, which again, well-intentioned, but it makes many projects just not pencil out. There are 20,000 apartments in the pipeline in San Francisco waiting on approvals, and they're already approved, and they can't move forward. The projects don't pencil out. So there's kind of a perfect storm of all of these things coming together. High land prices, extreme construction costs, prolonged approvals, uncompensated mandates. In addition to that, we have tariffs and interest rates. All of this comes together, and it means that we're facing a housing gridlock.
My God, it sounds hopeless. It sounds hopeless.
Well, it's not hopeless because it's all man-made. Since it's man-made, we can fix it. This is these and so we've so we look at it. We take each of those challenges and we say, how can we fix it? Well, and let me just give you a few examples. First of all, we want to unlock this neighborhood scale housing. If you go back 100 years, you have these beautiful neighborhoods that people love with the brownstones in Brooklyn, the row houses in San Francisco, the triple deckers here in Boston. These are all illegal now because you can't build a multifamily housing project of 4, 5, 6 stories without 2 stairs, and they all had one stair. So it just makes them unviable. We can change that. In Europe, they already have. We can have single stair safe buildings that would unlock all this community scale housing. There are empty office buildings, large floor plate office buildings. Most people think these are impractical to convert because you end up with all this dark space in the center. Housing can really only be around the perimeter where what we call the luminous zone. There are ways to turn them into vertical communities and mix on the same floor commercial and residential. We can uh, move to much more efficient construction methodology, modularity, et cetera. I'm really excited about some of the work we're doing, which is how to live large in less space using architectural robotics. So, bed comes down from the ceiling over a couch. So one space can be both living room and dining room and bedroom. It's kind of crazy to have a separate bedroom in a city where housing's over $1,000 a foot that's empty all day. And we have a startup that's now in 60 cities doing this. And I mean, I could go on and on. There are ways to end the permitting crisis. This is actually an incredibly effective application potentially of AI. Take all of these separate studies and approvals that are needed and just build these evaluation engines that can automate that. I think in 5 years we could go from 3 years to 3 weeks. And
So here's
happy
one
to.
here's one thing. Let me stop there because here's something I noticed that while the political conversations are about the need for affordable housing, right? I
Mhm,
mean that is clearly one of the
mhm.
watchwords of the politics as we come into 2026.
Yeah,
At the same time, individuals are often resistant to this stuff.
sure.
Multifamily housing in the suburbs is often fought by neighbors who say, "No, I don't want these apartment people in my suburban
Yeah.
area." We have older folks who are living in houses that they raised multiple children in that are far larger than the need is for those people not to move. How do we motivate the political system so some of these things actually happen?
Yeah, that is really key, and I think you have to start with a new type of community engagement. Yeah, people talk about the NIMBY-YIMBY wars, and quite often, NIMBY people are labeled as, resistant to change and opposing development, and the YIMBYs are for it. It's more complicated than that. I have a lot of sympathy for the people that object to the way development now happens in cities. Um, because these big international developers often come in and extract value out of the community, which without giving much back to the community. Um, so but I think there's a way. I outlined some of the innovations. There's a way to do development so both sides will agree. I think we can find common ground, and that means building more of a data-driven, evidence-based process of communicating to the public what the pros and cons are of development. Sure, you increase density, you're changing the character of the neighborhood, but you can show that it can also bring in revenue that funds the schools, that provides better restaurants, gives you a dog park and a playground, and even one thing that we're looking at is shared prosperity. If you um, grant a property owner an increase in floor area, that's like, giving them, a check, and that you're increasing the value of their property overnight with the rezoning. Take a bit of that and put it back into the community. Put it into an endowment and share that with the local community, not just in tax revenue. Share it with the community. You can even have fractional ownership of these projects. I mean, we have the technology to do this. We can tokenize the property. We can use smart contracts. We can, do a lot of things. The key is to do it in a way so the developer still makes a profit, because housing in the U.S. is built with private money. Developers have to make a profit or they're not going forward, but they can give back to the community. So it's not just return on investment. You can create a return to the community with development. And I think everybody, if they understand that and it's handled right with creative public policy, I think people would find common ground.
There's one hopeful trend that I'm seeing, and I'd love to hear whether you notice the same thing. Say
Mhm.
for the last maybe 70 years, the movement was out from cities, out to suburbs,
Mhm.
single family homes, sprawling development.
Mhm.
But there does seem to be a bit of an appreciation, maybe renewed appreciation for the pleasures of community, of living around other people. These
Absolutely.
these new these new urban developments, I know in some places have are fetching very high dollar costs, and I mean purchase prices. I think people have like having neighbors again if you do it in the right way. Is that big battleship beginning to turn, do you think?
Absolutely. With young people in particular. I mean, because of social media and people living online in large part, young people, I see it with my students. They crave, personal connections with other humans. The restaurants and the bars and the clubs and the public spaces and the sports facilities and all of that are these attractors that, strengthen social ties and personal connections. And in a place where I am, like Kendall Square, which is, considered a model innovation district, it's this exchange of ideas and the relationships that are formed that creates innovation. Yeah, sure, it helps to have MIT there. That's that's essential. But I think young people find connection in these urban places. I don't have a single student that I deal with, and I've asked them quite often, who wants to live in the suburbs now. They want to live in the city. They want to live where in vibrant places where they can form connections. Problem is when they get married and have children, they're forced to live in the suburbs because that's where the housing's more affordable. But if we could solve that, I think they'd stay in the city.
So let's talk about some practical steps that could be
Hmm.
taken soon-ish. If
Hmm.
we agree that there's got to be a profit motive, we got to get government to cooperate and speed up some of these approvals. What do you do? What should creative, energized people be focused on to try and jumpstart some of this stuff?
Well, I think first thing I realized is you make a difference in your own backyard. I mean, the big grand challenge, just to get a little broader for a second, the grand challenges of our era, whether you're talking about climate change or jobs for a new economy or the cost of housing, public health. I mean, these are all solved in local communities. So think of the solutions as bottom up, not top down. Don't wait on the national government. They're increasingly becoming dysfunctional all across the planet. I think we have to take this bottom up action. And I think I see cities doing this. California, particularly San Francisco, here in Cambridge, they're going through a kind of a radical change in the zoning. First time in many, many years. They just signed it last week in San Francisco. That's the first step. Then they got to fix the permitting. Then they have to fix the building codes. Then, then they have to fix the mandates so the developers can make a profit. And I think we can rough out a roadmap to do all of this. We have to fix the construction, methodologies that are used. We can focus on how to share prosperity. So let me just mention that for a minute because I think this is key. Um, if you're a property owner in the city and the property values are going up, it's not because of the actions of the property owner, it's because of the actions of the larger community. It's the collective efforts of all the residents and shop owners and local entrepreneurs and artists and the government infrastructure. So when that property value goes up, and particularly then if you upzone it, that should be shared with the community. If we can do that, I think that would bring a lot of people on board.
Kent, let's talk tech for a second.
Mhm.
Artificial intelligence obviously having a huge impact on so many parts of our world. Does that play some kind of role in this challenge of readdressing how we're going to create the housing that people need?
Oh yeah, that it's central to everything we're doing, and we one way we think about it is this technology that we have, all the generative tools, large language models, the system dynamics models, et cetera. That allows us to rehearse the future. I think the future is simulation-based urbanism. Right now, traditional planning, I mean, it's really pretty obsolete. It's based on these static models and intuition and political negotiation. But we can now build a virtual model of a building or a community or even the scale of the city that has rich data tagged to it. We can build an agent-based model, which is basically populating that virtual environment with synthetic people that go about their daily behaviors. Young people go to the coffee shop in the morning and the bars at night, and parents with children go to the playground. We can model all that, and we can collect data from the behavior of these agents and identify where the problems are, where it's working, where it's not working, and we can do this over and over iteratively. So we're in effect rehearsing the future. We can play out what might be the case in 1 year, 5 years, 10 years. I don't want to over exaggerate where we are, but we're making rapid progress. And I think within literally a few years, we'll be able to build very detailed synthetic models of future communities and test them. And then now what's interesting, if you get into dynamic governance, this is another use of AI, where right now the zoning ordinances are completely static. They just, like I mentioned earlier, passed zoning reform in California just the last week. But they put in place these rules and incentives that are just fixed in concrete. You have to provide so many, affordable units in a development for people of a certain income, and that formula is fixed, even if the numbers don't work. What we're looking at is having feedback mechanisms that are more like a natural ecosystem. So you're continually collecting data, you're running these models. You see, okay, what happened? The tariffs on lumber went up, so now the numbers don't work. So you can then reduce a bit the mandates. And so you're always getting, an optimized solution. And the model, therefore, doesn't have to be perfect that we're building because you're always refining the model through in an iterative process. So you converge on, to use a more academic term, we think of it as civic homeostasis, which is really just like a natural ecosystem with the predator prey feedback loops that keep everything in harmony. We can do the same thing with human societies. We can't do this manually as humans. It's too complicated.
Hmm.
But we can do it
Well,
with the data analytics and the kind of AI tools that are emerging.
Well, as a lifelong fan of that academic Saturday morning cartoon, The Jetsons, I've always been a fan of this gee whiz stuff. What else do you have other than the dining room tables that come down on top of the couch? Are there other things like that that are bouncing around the MIT Media Lab?
Well, I think it's with respect to housing, is generally about building dynamic environments that adapt to the needs of the residents dynamically, in response to their activities. So
Hmm.
you could have I already mentioned, so converts from a living space to a sleeping space at night, literally in a few seconds, effortlessly. We like to say easy is not good enough. It needs to be effortless and magical. A Murphy bed's easy, but nobody ever uses it. So you want to have these you want to have these systems that it just transform magically. A home office on demand, right? That collapses, a walk-in closet on demand. You could have, you say you have a couple living in an apartment, an older couple. The woman's in a wheelchair, the man is tall, and he has a bad back. So he needs high counters and narrow space. So if he loses balance, he can have grasping surfaces. She needs low
Interesting.
counters and a space with a wheelchair turning radius. This can transform, instantly according to use. And so those are the kind of things that I think are really really exciting with respect to housing. There's many other things. I mean, we're building mobility systems. We're doing robots to do last meter delivery to the front door. There's many uses of
Hmm.
robotics, but for housing, I
Hmm.
think these
Hmm.
transformable interiors are the most exciting.
Interesting. Well, perhaps I'm too easily impressed, but I have to tell you, I have very much enjoyed my keyless front door where I don't need a key and I can just push my finger on the lock and it pops open, as well as the thermostat that I can lower on my way
Yeah,
home on my mobile phone. I mean, those things, I don't think they're that
yeah.
expensive and they actually
No,
work.
they actually work, and for this robotic furniture, we're just using the equivalent of garage door opener motors. I mean, you can buy a garage door at Costco for a couple of $100s. I
Interesting.
mean, these systems don't
Well,
have to be expensive, and if you take 600 square feet out of an apartment that sells for $1,000 a foot, you're saving $600,000. That'll pay for fraction of that will pay for the technology.
interesting. Let me globalize you for a second.
Yeah.
Those of us who live in the United States often think first about the United States, but I mean,
Mhm.
are these kinds of solutions, these kind of questions, applicable around the world, especially in nations that aren't as developed as the one that you and I live in?
Well, that's a great question. I think an even bigger challenge of than solving problems in cities like New York or Boston or San Francisco is what's happening in the global South. I mean, that's where they're really experiencing the strain of rapid urbanization and mass displacement and migration, and you have informal settlements that don't have certainly don't have proper housing, but they don't have city water or sanitation services. They often have power, but it's illegal power that they tap into, and it just will not work with 2.5 billion people more people expected to live in cities by 2050. There's just no way we can build cities with the traditional Western urban planning methodologies and the centralized infrastructure. We need to have much more lightweight systems, and its technology is evolving. You could process waste at the scale of the toilet or the household. You can purify water now with some amazing systems. We can produce power locally, certainly with solar, but eventually we'll have these small modular nuclear batteries that could power the ship on the back of the truck and power a community. Um, and so we're interested in what we think of as formally informal, which is to say the best of what we have in the West with the best of informal community. I mean, the beautiful thing about these informal communities, if you visit them, it's not a bunch of poor, desperate people. These are entrepreneurs. And you need a bedroom. You build a bedroom on top of your structure. You don't have to go to the building department. They kind of, in other words, they're highly responsive, but with serious problems, right? We need to have that
Mhm.
kind of responsiveness in the North, and not impose our vision on the urbanization patterns in the South. But in other words, we can both learn from each other. So I think the future, both in the North and the South, is probably some hybrid system that combines the best of the both with new emerging technology.
So at the MIT Media Lab, are you guys solving all these problems? You creating these roadmaps?
Yes. I mean, we're trying to. Yeah, we've got a large team working on this. I have, my city science group here at the Media Lab, we've formed a city science network. So we now have affiliated city science labs around the world in Asia, South America, North America, Europe, and the Middle East. We're hoping to launch one soon in Africa. And that gives us people on the ground, researchers and activists and collaborators on the ground, so we can understand these complex problems and then take action.
Mhm.
Solution. There's no one size fits all solution, but we can rough out a suite of innovations that can help. But we're not going to change city governments in major cities, but we have relationships there where we can influence the direction that they go in.
Well, let me tell you one thing that gives me hope on this. And the way you talk about this is not especially ideological. Seems to me these are not really the kind of left-right debates that seem to
No,
have paralyzed so much of our
no.
political dialogue. Am I correct in thinking that these kind of solutions are things that the conservatives, liberals, moderates, even some radicals ought to be able to embrace in a burst of rare unity in our political system. Is that overly naive on my part?
No, in fact, that's what gives me hope. That when we talk to the people in these local cities, that it has become very ideological. But when you lay out solutions without getting into left-right concerns, people realize that cities are built with private money. That's a capitalist system. Government can set the rules. If you can find this right blending of creative, use of market forces and creative governments, I think the left and right can get on board. So we try to thread the needle between the left and the right and find common ground. And I think it's there. I'm optimistic.
Kent Larson is an optimistic architect and the director of the City Science program at the MIT Media Lab. Hey, it's real good of you to spend this time with us. I think everybody will learn something from this conversation.
My pleasure.
It's no secret that we live in a climate challenged world, wrestling with that issue from 1,000 different directions. Such a big impact on the questions of housing and the built environment and the way that we're going to live, not just today, but years, decades into the future. As one of those most promising answers may lie offshore, not the kinds of things that we're experiencing on solid grounds, but what opportunities and what challenges lie as that land gives way to water. Majority of the earth is water, and if we can find ways to live with it better, don't you think we'd all be better off? Right at the center of some of the most creative thinking on that topic, our guest in this segment, Koen Oldgoes, is with Water Studios NL, dealing with that very question. Why stop thinking at the edge of the shoreline? Are there answers with us treating water not just as a threat, but as an opportunity? Are there housing solutions that can involve floating cities and interacting with the water in new and creative ways? I'm so excited to get this conversation started. Kuhn, very good of you to join us here.
Yeah, good day. Nice to be here.
Sure. So we use terms like floating cities and waterborne development. The knowledge that most of us has about that maybe involves a beach house or somebody building something close to a body of water. But you guys are thinking in some more creative ways about the interaction of land, water, and housing development. Can you get us started? Are we right thinking that water can provide opportunities, not only challenges here?
Yeah, well, I think water is an opportunity. Of course, every city in the world is in or next or close to the water. Especially here, I'm from the Netherlands, so we have built our country on top of the water, making swamps into dry land. But for that, we had to pump away a lot of water. And I think that always in the Netherlands, they have seen water as a threat. But if you see it as a threat, then water is your enemy. And then at some point, you will most probably lose that fight. And what I see now is that there's a kind of twist, and where we see that cities are starting to also embrace the water and see if they can not only hold it back, but also let it join the city and build on top of it. And that is, of course, not new. We have seen that already since the 50s and 60s, that there are houseboats in Amsterdam and on other cities. But those were always the very small housing for one family, and it was not really a solution for cities. But we think now that we can change that and that we have the recipe to let cities leap. Cities are never the same. 150 years ago, you had cities without electricity, cities without cars, cities without high-rise buildings. And then when technology changed, when we got electricity, also the city started to grow. And with the car, there was even also the new possibilities. And with the elevator, we got vertical cities. We could grow up. And I think now is the time that we see that floating structures and floating technology makes our cities to grow over the water. And that's very, very exciting, because the recipe change, and with that also we get much more opportunities. We get cities that don't even use space on the water, but are also able to change configuration through the seasons or through years.
So for so many years, people thought about water as maybe something we could fill in. We could create landfill and extend the land. Here in New York City, where I am, we have a development in Lower Manhattan called Battery Park City that used to be water, and they dumped a lot of dirt there, and now it's solid ground. But that's not what you're talking about, is it?
No, absolutely not. No, sorry. No, it's completely different. Well, Manhattan, 1/3 of Manhattan was this water and is being reclaimed. But if you reclaim, then at some point, if the water will rise, also that land will start to flood. And especially in Manhattan, I think it's like 5 or 6 feet above water. So if we get 6 or 7 feet in the next 20 years or 50 years, then still those location problem. We don't talk about reclamation about floating. So these are large platforms, maybe of even 1,000 by 1,000 feet. And if you look underneath it, there's nothing, there's water. And these whole platforms can go up and down with the water, with the fluctuation. And even if build even high-rise buildings, you can have roads, you can have parks, green, everything together. So we think it's in an era where we are in lack of space because of urbanization and because of the sea level rise, that the best way to find new space is on water. And again, not by reclamation, just by making it floating foundations. There is a made from concrete pontoons, so large concrete caissons, which you connect together, and they feel rock solid. So if you live on tip of the platforms, you don't even talk about floating buildings anymore. I don't think that 90% of the people won't even feel that it's floating. So that's really a difference than the floating house you would see in Amsterdam, which are just very small single floating houses.
So if you again, I think people are fascinated by just the day-to-day life aspects of this. So if you were living on such a platform, there's not a problem of seasickness or of rising and falling tides or of storms somehow dislocating it. You have engineering solutions for those things?
Absolutely, because and before, as I said, it was small houses, and small houses move with every movement of the water. But if your
Mhm.
platforms become larger and really, really large, then they don't move anymore. They become very, very stable. And certain people who live on top of it, yeah, it's just like a normal neighborhood. Compared a bit with Venice, where you also have all these canals in between. Well, these kind of atmosphere, these kind of cities we now can build. And that it is fascinating because it opens all new opportunities, and we can grow into the lakes, we can grow over the rivers, and we can even grow onto the sea. Of course, the heavier weather we have and the more waves we have, the more expensive it starts to be. So it's
Mhm.
not that we see large scale floating cities in the middle of the ocean, but I see that the border between land and water starts to diffuse, and especially in large cities where harbors are become the new potential to build, because harbors can't accommodate large ships anymore, so they become open space, and that space we can use for floating neighborhoods. But I think it's not only the housing we will bring, it's all kinds of functions. And I've always been fascinated with the fact that the cities we build, that they are so static. You place houses, roads, buildings, and they stay there for 30, 50, 70, 100 years, and they don't move. But meanwhile, communities completely change. Your needs change, demands change. And we as urban planners and architects, we don't have that many tools to to change these kind of configurations till now, because when we have floating buildings and floating platforms and floating roads, means that same with Lego, you can start to move them around. And that means that you can adjust to the change of demands. And so what I foresee is the next city is not only a floating city, that sounds nice, but it's much more a dynamic city, a city that is possible to adjust to political change, technical change, economical change, climate change, and make it able to adjust.
Wow, but now let's talk about scale a second. It was very easy if we were talking about a houseboat that someone could move the houseboat to the next town or the next harbor or the next nation, and one person could make a decision like that. To create these kind of developments, though, my goodness, we're talking about the private developers. We're talking about government regulation, municipalities who have views about this sort of stuff, environmentalists who have views. Boy, that sounds like some complicated work.
It is, because you have to work with existing legal frameworks, and they are not ready for these kind of platforms. So that means that either you have to be in a country that's open for it. So, for instance, we are now building a float boat in Maldives, and they have a need for safe space, so they can bend the rules a bit, and that is necessary. If you can't change the legal framework, you can't also accommodate these kind of platforms. But once you have the legal framework in place, yeah, then there's so many things you can do. For instance, we are now busy with a floating tower that will be made in Europe and then towed over the water towards the Middle East. Imagine that you see a floating tower going over the water through the Suez Canal. It's fantastic. That's all based on offshore technology. Because in the Netherlands, but you have the same that in the States, there's a lot of offshore platforms, oil rigs in the Gulf, and we use that technology. So if you can move an oil platform or you can move a big cruise ship from A to B, you can also move parts of a neighborhood over water. And then we come to a kind of new realm in which cities are not longer just built with products at a location, but you see them much more as products. So you order products and they will be moved to your city and placed there, and can even move after maybe 20 or 30 years to another location. So there's many more things possible with that. And I think that's the great time we live in, that there is also a need for it, because cities are growing very fast and we have all these problems which we just can't answer with regular and traditional architecture and buildings. And floating buildings, a new recipe. I've mentioned
it's interesting. Go ahead.
Oh, we've mentioned that to people, that we don't see ourselves that much as architects or urban planners. We see as much as city doctors, and we see water as a medicine. We really believe that cities that have a lot of water and start to use it in the way we foresee it will be the champions of the future. Cities will be much more flexible, and they will be much more able to cope with unknown problems that we face in the next decades. So fascinating, really, really. And the technology is not new, because people think, okay, oh, you invented a floating building or a floating platform. That's absolutely not the case. Already in the 50s and 60s, there were architects who foresee this fantastic floating cities in the Bay of Tokyo, for instance. But there was no need for it. And maybe also the money was not yet there. The cities were not growing as fast, and definitely climate change was not around the corner. Now, today, it's different. All these problems come together and they ask cities to leap. Cities have to go to a next kind of evolution. And we think that water is absolutely what we need to make cities grow and change. And maybe that we look back in maybe 20 or 30 years, we see that floating technology have changed cities the same as that the elevator did, or that the car did, or that electricity did. It's just a technology that opens a whole new box of possibilities.
Well, one thing that every city struggles with is tax revenues, right? Cities need money to operate and to provide services to the people, to provide health and education and the thousands of other things that their citizens need. If you're talking about essentially creating more developmental space, I don't want to call it developmentable land, but developmentable space, doesn't that have the prospect of providing new revenues, new living opportunities, and frankly, more taxation that cities need to grow and to thrive? This isn't only a cost, it can also be a revenue, can't it?
Absolutely, it should be in revenue, and it's very good that you bring this point to the table, because we had a client in Miami who ordered a very large floating house. I think it costed like $5 million, and we saw it as real estate. But then he saw it not as real estate; he saw it as a ship. So, and for a ship, you don't pay real estate tax, and he had to go to court to get his rights. And in the end, the city, they were not so happy that it became a ship. But for me, that's not good, because when people see it as a ship and there's no real estate tax, that means that also governments and authorities won't give new places or rezone these places for floating buildings. So what we really need is a tax system. And I think buildings on water and neighborhoods on water should be seen just normal as real estate and should contribute to the income of authorities.
So let me ask you this. As we talk about these prospects here, they sound so dramatic and so elegant and so glamorous in some ways. My mind immediately goes to housing for the wealthy. I mean, these are going to be beautiful penthouse apartments costing millions of dollars. Is that a fair assumption, or can this be helpful in terms of providing workforce housing or housing for working class people or middle class people, or dealing with other sorts of social issues? Is that a component of this, or is this just housing for rich people?
Well, it is at this moment, yeah, and there's always with new technologies, or the implementation of new technologies. It starts with the rich. The rich pay for the innovation. If you see it also with these starships going to space, it's the rich who pay like 100,000 for a trip, and then maybe in 20 years or 50 years, more people can take advantage of that. It's the same with floating housing. We see price dropping now. We start to build the large villas for the rich. With that technology, we're now able to make much more affordable housing. How do we do that? That's the change in density. Before we built one villa, one family, and now we design floating apartment buildings where we have like 100 units on one platform, and even the floating high rise where we have also, with a little bit of space, a lot of units. It doesn't stop there. It's also when we go to less privileged countries where there's a lot of floods, like in India, Bangladesh. We see that the same technology we use for the rich, we can now use for the very poor. We work in wet slums, locations where there are not that many rights, no right to land tenure. There's a lot of problems, and for these locations, we are now in a process of designing what we call 2K houses that only cost $2,000. What you get for that is a very simple platform, one small house of a 300 square feet on it, a small bathroom, small kitchen. And these houses, they are being built with recipes with local materials. So it's very, very affordable. Why the 2K? Why the $2,000? Because people who live in these kind of flood zones, once they have to evacuate, or when their houses are demolished, the local governments pay them $2,000 to rebuild a house. So if you can get that money to rebuild it in a floating structure, then they will be safe for decades, because these houses will move up and down with the floods. So it's as you asked, is it for the rich? Yes, we started with the rich, and now we're moving towards a much more different audience, and that's also much more gives me much more fun, because it's I don't want to look back in 30 years and that we have just only built 100 floating villas for the rich. We really want to make a change in the city, and the change is needed, because if you now look in India and Bangladesh, every year millions of people are being threatened and see the results of floods. And if we can change their foundations, change the communities that live in these flood zones and that are 90% of the time dry, but when the water comes, they go up and down. Yeah, that's I think the next step, and that's for your hometown. New Orleans is also, I think, the way to go. Also there, I know that already 15 years, 20 years ago, after the disaster, they started to look at amphibious structures, and also those were the single ones. And a lot of architects came to your city, and they innovated a lot. And that innovation has had effect on neighborhoods that we are now doing in India and Bihar. So
Interesting.
it starts mostly with a kind of disaster. Then there's a time window in which of a time slot in which authorities are open for change, and where the whole world is looking at these kind of locations. And then as an architect, you have to make sure that you innovate and take that information to other zones. And that's what we do at the company.
Terrific. That's very encouraging. I can imagine scenarios where, as a transitional method, you might be able to say, okay, this is going to be 100 units of housing, and 70 of them are for wealthy clients. But you know what? In order to win the approval from the local authorities, you've got to commit to produce 30 units of subsidized housing, or housing that would be more in reach of working people. So here's the question, it seems to me. What is it, as a practical matter, needs to happen in order to spur this kind of development? I can imagine many people listening to us say, wow, that sounds interesting. That sounds amazing. But what has to happen in practical terms for this kind of waterborne development to become more common?
Yeah, there are three things that have to happen. First, we as architects, we have to design more urban components. We can't just deliver these small floating villas. That doesn't work. We have to design, as I said, the larger platforms. We have to design many more utilities, so that you have a whole toolbox of solutions that you can place in these water areas. Second, we have to find more locations, and we have to rezone more locations. So we have to go to authorities, go to the environmental impact assessments, and to show that our platforms on these water have a positive and not a negative effect on the location. So when we have more products and we have more locations, then the third thing is that we have to be much more flexible. We shouldn't look at water as a place where you build and where you stay forever. It's a place also where you can build temporary. So we can have, for instance, temporary student housing that can stay for 10 or 15 years on location. If you have that flexibility in time, if you have more components and more locations, then it can grow to a real business. We have to close the gap for what we build on land and what we build on the water. Today you see, for instance, again in Miami, in Brickell, you see all these large high-rise buildings,
Sure.
and you see a few small floating buildings in front of them. Everybody understands that that's not a match. It's not that can help for the city to become more resilient. And speaking about Miami, it's a city that is a bit of doomed. There is no way you can protect the city with the same dikes and levees as we did in the Netherlands or in New Orleans. It's a city that only way you can save it is to change the buildings and to make them flood proof. And we have to do that by either put them on stilts or to give them a floating foundation. So when the water comes, that they start to float. So it's a whole change in thinking. And I'm not sure that many of these cities in the US are already ready for that. Mostly it takes a kind of disaster to start rethinking how a city should improve. And what we have to do as architects, we have to be ready. We have to make sure that we show the developers, we show the authorities that all these products are ready, and that once they are ready, we can just start to building these neighborhoods that are safe and that are ready for the future.
Well, these conversations have to begin with this sort of blue sky thinking that you and I are engaged in right now, asking what's possible, saying what is the most likely route to get there, and what might it look like when we arrive. I guess we're talking, and tell me if I'm summing up well, that we're really talking about working with water instead of against water. Is that a pretty good way to summarize it?
No, definitely, yeah, and maybe also good to mention that it's not just a theory or just a technology. Yeah, what we see now in Maldives, a country in the middle of the Indian Ocean, threatened by sea level rise, same height as Lower Manhattan, only 5-6 feet above water, but then the whole country, with exist of all these small islands, the highest point is at 5 feet above water. They need to have new solutions. And for them, we are building now a floating neighborhood with 5,000 houses, 5,000 units. And that for the first time shows that we can scale up and that we can bring houses that is affordable for everybody in the Maldives. And I think that's a huge step forward. And once you see the first people living over there and having just a normal and safe life on top of the water, I think it will spread, and you will see that in New York, London, Tokyo, Shanghai in the next 10, 15 years, also cities will grow over the water and become more resilient and also more flexible. So I think, yes, water is a friend. Live with water, don't fight it, and then we get in a complete new realm.
And if we're thinking of these as living communities, actually people going about their day-to-day lives there, how can those communities adapt over time as the conditions and the needs change for those people? Does that change keep going?
Well, change goes very slow. So if you talk about for the sea level rise, the water the level that rises, that goes slow that you don't see it. That is maybe a feet in 20 years. So that's very slow. It's much more the extreme weather conditions. The rain that falls much faster, and these kind of conditions that we have to deal with, tsunamis, flash floods. That's where a city should be ready for. And there's a fantastic example for a neighborhood here in the Netherlands. It was already built, I think, 20 years ago. And these people live near the river. And once a year, or once in 2 or 3 years, there's a flood. And then the houses, which are amphibious houses, they all start to float. And instead of the people are afraid of it and that they run away, they are inviting all their friends, and these moments are just like a party because everybody wants to show that their house starts to float. So instead of being afraid of the water, it's a good event, and I love this kind of attitude change, and that of course it's not yet been adopted to every city in the world, but
Mhm.
I think there's a chance that if we see water as our friend and not as our enemy, there will be a big change in also the cost that we now have in our cities, because many millions are being spent on defense with dikes, levees, and still we are not sure that we can be safe with the next 10, 20 or 30 years. So if you already are on top of the water, like the amphibious structures, then it doesn't matter how much water there will be. And I think that's
And can you move structures in and out of these little floating cities, like a community center, for instance, or is that dynamic as well, or are you stuck with what you
yeah.
started with?
No, absolutely. It's that's definitely dynamic, and I'm always fascinated. Back in New York, when I'm in New York in the summer, it's really hot. The winter very cold, and still the houses are exactly the same, and it doesn't change. So I really foresee possibilities where we design seasonal neighborhoods, seasonal cities that change configuration. So imagine in the winter that all the houses are much closer to each other. It's a different way of living with the water than in summertime, where everything opens up and also activities on the water start to happen. So it's that's possible, but also on a very small scale. We have had here floating neighbors in the Netherlands, where we have houses where we can rotate the houses or where we can add rooms to it. So if you have, for instance,
Ah.
for the weekend, you just order an extra room. It's being connected for your house for 2 days and then be placed to another house. So it's that flexibility that we need. By doing that, our house can be much smaller, so we can be more effective.
Interesting, and you could imagine as the life of a family change, that the kids move out, and maybe you need a smaller house for the empty nester couple that's living
Very
there,
good
right?
point.
People's lives change over time, right?
That's a very good point. In the Netherlands, I think we have here 17 million people, and we lack almost a million houses. And many of the older people live in very large houses, have 2, 3 rooms over with just empty, but they
Mhm.
have not the possibility to change to another house because the small houses are not available. So if we, for those people, can start building floating neighborhoods with smaller ones, then people also start to move from big house to small house. So it's not that I want to build complete floating neighborhoods. We just want to make cities where maybe 3 to 5% of the water is being used for these kind of floating structures, and by that change the complete flexibility of the whole city.
So there is this concept, city apps, where there is a dynamism even to the structures inside the city. I'm thinking about the Olympics. We build these entire cities to try and accommodate Olympics every 4 years. And then what do we do with them afterward? Are there answers wrapped up in this waterborne development?
Yeah, it's crazy, yeah, that you see that every 4 year happening, and not only with the Olympics, but also with big other sport events. And I think that can change. I think we go to an era where we call these kind of projects global mobile assets. So there will be large investors who start to build floating stadiums, floating hotels, floating infrastructure, and you can just rent it for 2 or 3 months. It will come to your city and you can use it, and afterward it will be taken away. That also opens the possibility for less fortunate cities to organize this kind of platform, the kind of sport events, because it's less expensive. Maybe it's only 1/20th of the total cost. We call this city apps, and you have to see it a bit the same as your smartphone. Your smartphone, it has all these apps on it, and you have placed those apps because they accommodate your needs. Well, it's the same with the city. If there's a need, you bring city apps, you bring large-scale floating platforms with functions, being the stadiums or even being other functions. You use them for some time and you take them away. And that new industry of global mobile assets is what going to change our cities maybe drastically in the next 10, 15 years.
So as water flows in and out, so can design. Things can get bigger, smaller. I could have a shoreline view this week and maybe a forest view next week. Listen, the Netherlands has such a long history of creative thinking on living with water, from the building of the dikes all the way forward. So I suppose it's only natural that you guys will be on the cutting edge of this sort of design. Joining us from Water Studio Kuhn Autus, thank you so much for sharing some of these ideas with us.
Great. Thank you.
Nabasana mtuwo yage kanisa yabatwaye bakiza ngo tukibangira ngo abatwabona bazayisaza haza bebemberwe umusa yagera ngo ahi hamwe n'itongo mwakwata amaguru tulenda kuleta abafuruki kutwaleta abafuruki muramutakirabaho berakumu titulirukanga twaza ku batwite umwanya kubagezere ngo turuga mwanya itwe nabatata twaza kubasumbira imwaho utine rusya nahati bwene tukwebegesha.
The Batwa, who were evicted from their natural home, the Bwindi forest, in 1991. They were homeless with no hope. Some of them were beaten because they were like beggars. And they were even subjected to hard labor. So it was constant, continuous suffering of the Batwa. And I saw really this was inhuman.
When they came out of the forest, they looked at themselves as people who were not wanted. They didn't know whether they were loved. They were not sure that they were safe. So they were afraid. They needed land where they could grow their own food, housing where they could sleep. While we were there struggling, that's when we received Mama Diane.
In 1993, my husband and I were invited to go to Uganda, and we met Archbishop Livingston Nkoyoyo. He came up to me and he said, "I need your help." There are thousands of people dying in the southwestern region of Uganda, and there was no other help for them. And I need you to help resettle them.
One of the lessons that we learn over and over again at the Global Housing Foundation is that they can't just plop housing into some far off place and expect it to work. People who are actually going to live in those units of housing have to be involved at every step of the way. Otherwise, uh, the global partners will not be able to achieve their own goals. Local people will not be able to be assisted in the ways that would be most efficient and most effective. And inevitably, the projects will run out of gas and not work as well as we need them to. The lesson truly is that from the very beginning, grassroots engagement it has to be a vital part of this entire process, which is why we're calling this segment Building Hope, Housing, Health, and Economic Empowerment. All of those things are wired together. Here to help us unwind some of this, Dr. Lillian Butungi Niwagaba is the director of the Center for Global Health at New York Institute of Technology, an active volunteer with the Kellerman Foundation, and someone who is right in the middle of efforts to create just this kind of grassroots housing project that I'm describing in the nation of Uganda. Doctor, good of you to join us here.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
So am I right about that? It is no good use of money and effort to just go plop a housing project in the middle of some city or culture or rural area. This has to bubble up together, global partners, local empowerment together. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes. It's actually been quite a long process to build the houses for the Batwa in Bwindi community. And it's been challenging, but they started with banana leaf houses. Then they moved up a little bit to mud and brick houses. And then they moved on to the interlocking blocks that we are talking about today.
So talk a little bit about how that process unfolded. Who had the ideas? How did those conversations begin? And what is it that has made them productive?
The Kellerman Foundation had the idea, and they talked to a guy from one of the universities here in Uganda. And when he started talking about it, we kind of all thought he was crazy. But, we just tried it out, and it worked. Basically, it worked, and we started right away.
So describe to me the project in a physical term. What are these housing pieces like?
The housing are like brick houses, and basically they have a machine that they use to make the bricks. The bricks are made of natural soil and a little bit of cement. They put in just a little measure of cement and make the brick. And then they cure it for about a week, and then it's ready. No, it's not a complicated process. It's a very simple process.
And what's inside these houses? How are they outfitted?
There are 4 rooms,
Mm-hmm.
and they are outfitted with a sitting room and a bedroom and 2 bedrooms, and really, really great. I mean, you get in, they are cool, they are very nice, and they work.
How do they compare? Because I think this is interesting. How do they compare with the houses that people were previously living in? I have to assume they're a big improvement.
these are super, super, super better than the houses they were in, because first and foremost, the houses they were in were mud floors. And now these are nice cemented floors, and that alone is a win. And the rooms are very nice, and I mean, very good. The sides are kind of polished, and they look really nice when you get into one.
That's it. Now, would you describe to folks a little bit about the role that you were playing? How is your involvement occurring actually on the ground and providing assistance and advice to these efforts in Uganda? What do you do?
Oh, at first I was a board member, a member of the board where you plan what things are going to happen in that year. And, we raise money for the brick housing. We talk to people, we go and tell them about the Batwa story, and we actually get them to get excited and start giving. And yeah, so we raise money for the brick houses.
Terrific. And tell a little bit about the Batwa people, because I think many people around the world may not be familiar with them. How would you describe them as people? What do they do with their lives? What are their goals? What are their hopes?
The Batwa people are a very unique group of people. First of all, their physical appearance is very interesting. They are short. They grow to about 4 feet, and they lived in the forest. They lived in the forest and never interacted with other communities. But in 1991 or two, the president of Uganda wanted to make tourism a big deal, so he kicked them out. He kicked them out of the forest and said, go live wherever you can. And so they tried to get out. And basically, when they got out, there was nothing for them. A very dear friend of mine, actually, before I was a board member, was tasked by a bishop, the Archbishop of Uganda. He said, I want you to go and look at these people and tell me how we can help them, because they were dying of diseases, because living in the forest had protected them. So when they came out, they were dying of all kinds of diseases. And so the Church of Uganda, the Archbishop of the Church of Uganda came to visit in the US, and he asked the lady if she can find a person who can come and do a health assessment. And the lady was Diane Stanton. That was her name. Unfortunately, she passed away. But she was the Bishop of Dallas's wife. And she found a guy. Yeah, she found a guy named Scott Kellerman who came to help the Batwa.
Now, Doctor, given the history, given the experiences that these folks have had, there must have been a tremendous amount of suspicion when the Kellerman Foundation first arrived. How could they be trusted? Was that an issue?
Exactly. So when Dr. Kellerman went there to do the needs assessment, he kind of ended up treating so many people, treating the Batwa and, against malaria. Their children were dying and all that. And he had to build that trust with them. And actually, it took a long time to build the trust, but eventually he got in and they trusted him. And he built a hospital for them. He built it's incredible if you see what he did for them.
Yeah. No, talk about the hospital just a little bit. Does that provide employment? Does it provide direct services. Talk about the impact of a hospital like that.
Oh, the hospital is incredible. It has provided a lifeline for the Batwa. And basically, it's a 154 hospital. It has all kinds of specialties, and it is very nice. At first, they couldn't use it, like you said, because they didn't trust him. And then he kind of went and visited with them and talked to them. How can I make you trust me more? And they told him what their source of their distrust. You know, they were like, you know, before white people came and tried to help us, but they didn't, and you know, those kinds of things. And eventually they trusted him. He's their best friend now. If you talk to the Batwa, he's their best friend, and he's done a lot of incredible work. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, one of the lessons that I am hearing in your conversation is how personal so much of this work is. You can come up with a great policy, you can have a wonderful plan, but unless you can establish personal relationships and trust, those things may never come to fruition.
Absolutely, absolutely. They had to learn to trust Dr. Kellerman. They had to become his friend. They really, really tried, and it has worked. There are about 6 schools in the area where they live. He built them all. With the help of the foundation, of course, and some of them are boarding schools, some of them are first to 7th grade, and they are incredible. They are incredible.
So how would you assess the future of the Batwa people? Housing is obviously part of the challenge, but you mentioned several other challenges, education and health and the relationship with their own national government. I mean, are you pessimistic? Are you optimistic? What do you think about the future?
I am very optimistic because, first of all, housing is a very important aspect of their future. So once you have housing under control, and you know, we build about 20 houses a year for them. And we pick a family and then go take the machine and build the home. And, you know, and with education, we have put there schools that help them. We had our first graduate a few years ago from the nursing school. We also built a nursing school, and, you know, in addition to the hospital. And so we have so many people graduating from the hospital and from the nursing school. And it is not that it's that just the Batwa, but it has helped the whole community. It has helped everybody in the community.
How is it that people get to live in these houses? Who selects them? Are there more people who want to move in than you have housing available for?
Yes, we do. A lot of people want to live in these houses, and
How do you choose? How do you choose?
exactly. So we kind of look at the family. It has to be a family, at least of 4 people, and you know, people in Uganda have many kids. We say at least 4 people, and we select them based on their conditions, on their circumstances. And we end up choosing some really good people who deserve to have the home. And eventually, all of them will get a home.
Yeah. And people are treating the homes well, because you don't want people to move into a beautiful new home and then have it be deteriorating over the years. Are they taking responsibility for these homes?
Yes, they take very good responsibility for them. They clean them. They are very, very good at taking responsibility for them, and they appreciate the fact that they got a home, and really they keep them clean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, do they own the home? Do they rent the home? How does all of that work?
They own the home, so we bought land. We bought land for them,
Hmm.
and so we build the home on the land that we bought. So
I see.
for each
So
family,
the home is their home, the family
it
home,
is
and when
exactly.
as the years go on, and people will die and new people will be born, would you expect that
Mm.
that home would stay in the family? Would they sell the home? What do you
Abs-
think would happen?
Absolutely, it will stay in the family. It will stay in the family. Yeah.
Okay,
Hmm.
because
Hmm.
everything, doctor, that I'm hearing from you
Mm.
seems to me to be integrated together. That the relationship of the
Exactly.
family to the home
Hmm.
to the educational process to the
Yes.
hospital. Talk a little bit more about the hospital because I think that seems to be such an impactful institution. People don't understand how much difference one hospital can make.
Oh, it is amazing. The hospital, first and foremost, the battle have insurance at the hospital. It is like $4 or something like for the year.
Hmm. Wow.
And the hospital they have maternity wards, they have men's wards, they have women's wards, they have children's wards. They have a really, really good setting for the hospital. And a lot of people go there from the US, and we send students to the hospital who are
Hmm.
practicing. And, so they have a good rotation of people coming through. And they have doctors that they pay, that the hospital pays itself. And sometimes the foundation tops up a little bit, but not so much. So it's a really dynamic hospital, very active. I think they have a population of about 250 people or something like that.
Hmm.
And it's very, very active. Yeah.
And does the hospital play a big role in the economics of the community? Does it have economic impact?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. Because the people there were dying of these diseases, the malarias, the HIV, and all that. But the hospital came in and really helped. Now the people are active and working. And so the economic impact is unbelievable. It is so good. It is so impactful. And yeah, and tourism is also part of the part of the community. So they have a very good and people, tourists who are foreigners, when they go there, they go to the hospital if they have a problem. So it is also a very big impact for the national development. Yeah.
Yeah. And does the hospital provide employment for Batwa people as well?
Yes, it employs Batwa, a lot of Batwa. It employs local people. It employs foreigners. It employs Americans. It employs British. Yeah, it's a very good. It's a very good hospital. Yeah.
Well,
Mm.
I have to think as well that the students who come over from America and elsewhere to have the experience
Mm.
of living and working in a place like that, it must be a life-changing experience for them.
It is a transformational experience. Students who go there, they go there for a month. When they come back, they have no words. They are like, oh my God, this is the most life-changing experience you have given me. And so we really encourage students to go there, and they do. And it's a very transformational.
Well, terrific. It sounds like a project worthy of further support. It sounds like you all are
Yes.
up and running, but frankly, you still have a lot of work to do.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And we know that. We know that we have a lot of work to do. We keep working, raising money, and making sure that the hospital is running, making sure the schools are there, making sure that we are actually developing a university. So everything is working really well. So,
Good, good. How would you describe the connection between the hospital and the
mhm.
providing of safe housing? Do those two things interact with each other?
Yes, they do interact because the people who were coming to the hospital living in mud houses and, the dust, the fleas, the what, it was not good. So now they come, everything is like very straightforward.
Hmm.
They are very healthy, they are very clean, and everything works out. Yeah.
Interesting. And I assume if you send someone home from the hospital, you can have some confidence that they will be going into a safe and
Exactly.
a
Clean
clean, where
home. Yeah.
they're not gonna come back in 2 weeks with a whole new set of ailments. So,
Exactly.
well,
Exactly.
listen, congratulations on your work. It sounds daunting. It sounds challenging. It sounds, however,
Mm.
culturally fascinating and
Yes. Yes.
worthy of some support. Dr. Lillian Butungi Niwagaba from the New York Institute of
Yes.
Technology, and also working with the Kellerman Foundation. It sounds like you found a project that you can be very passionate about.
Very, very passionate about it. Yeah, I did. I did. Yeah.
Well, thank you
Mhm.
so much for spending time with us. Good luck in your continued efforts.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate
Mhm.
it. Yeah. Thank you so much.
These tiny homes are going to help our people. They're going to empower them. They're going to uplift them. I used to work at Housing Authority here, and we would remodel the houses that were condemned due to drug use or whatnot. And we remodel them, and people would say, why we remodel them? They're just going to mess them up again. But you know what? You open the doors for a brand new home, and you watch the children. You watch those children walk into that home. They're excited. They're running around. They can say, this is going to be my room. This here, we're going to have a Christmas tree here. That's what we're doing this for.
Looking back, the first time I was here, I remember George, the project manager of this, speaking to us, and we're in the room over here, and he points to the corner and he says, "This is where we are now," and he says, "This is when I don't know when we're going to finish." And I think all of us kind of had the same thing as, wow, hope we didn't bite off more than we can chew.
It was hard to fathom what it would take to achieve the full scope of the project. When one says, we're YMCA alumni, we're going to build 4 tiny homes. We don't realize the detail that it will take to organize that, and the number of people and the amount of money. We didn't think of that. Really, my mind just thought of the end result and saying and feeling, this is a good thing for us to do.
I knew I could manage it. I knew I could manage volunteers. I knew I could organize. I was excited right from the beginning because it was on a Native American reservation, and the only YMCA that's on a Native American reservation. We had a plan, we had an architect, we had drawings, we had a learning curve. The first year we barely got up one. The second year we got up the second one finally, and the third year we got up 2 more. Boom, boom. It's been amazing.
Building a nice house is one thing, but building a nice house that fits in with the culture and geography and traditions of where that house exists, well, that's something else entirely. Which is why we're calling this segment Designing with Culture, reclaiming identity through indigenous architecture. Joining us to have this conversation, Annie Combs is a principal at Ceres Combs Architecture and is right in the middle of, I guess we can call it a movement, Annie, but placing architecture inside culture. Boy, that sounds complicated. Isn't it a lot easier to just plop a house somewhere and hope for the best?
If that is the first question, the answer is no, that's not a great idea because specifically in the context of working on a reservation, um, you really need to respond to the needs of the local population. And I would say that in the United States, I mean, I do a lot of work in New York City, and there are a lot of common threads between what people want in New York. But working on a reservation where tribal members have historically lived like their own building technique was temporary. It was a teepee, so they were nomadic.
Mhm.
They never had a process where they translated that into a more static brick and mortar building typology. So on Cheyenne River, where this project is located, uh, the Lakota people, when they were put on reservations and stopped being nomadic, they did start to build log cabins. Some of the settlers taught them some of their building techniques, and if you go around the reservation, sometimes you can find them standing. They were 2-room cabins typically. But by the 1960s, there were still people living in teepees, and the U.S. government was uncomfortable with the optics of people living on the prairies and teepees. And so HUD started building housing. But when HUD came to the reservation, there was no discussion with the community about how they wanted to live, how culturally they lived together or lived apart, and and also how many people would live in a house, things like that. There was no discussion. It was just like, here's a house, you should be happy about it. And actually through the process of building that house, there was like yet another trauma inflicted upon them because um, for example, one of the typologies they set up was the scatter site, which was to encourage farming, which the Lakota weren't a farming tribe, and individuality, which is a very American concept. But they had been so used to living communally to stick a family out in the middle of nowhere in a house was actually quite difficult for them. So just things like
Right.
that. Just conceptually giving somebody a house is not necessarily enough in terms of like helping them establish themselves as a family.
Well, there is so much to unpack there. Let's start like this. When we use a term like indigenous architecture, what goes into that? What goes through your mind when you hear those two words put together?
So, I mean, I think of indigenous architecture as architecture that's actually developed through whatever tribe it is you're referring to. So even this project, I wouldn't necessarily call it indigenous architecture because I'm not indigenous. And I worked with the tribe on the design and put their input into the building and the layout, not just of one building, but how the buildings worked in a cluster.
Mhm.
But because I'm not actually indigenous, I wouldn't call it indigenous. But like the teepee structure, certainly I'd say is indigenous, or an adobe structure is an indigenous building typology. Yeah.
So when you begin a project like this, is the communication with the client or with the folks who are actually going to be living in these houses, is it different from the kind of conversations you might have with any client?
Yes and no. So it's similar in that with anybody I'm working with, I really have to listen to what their needs are and how they live. But with this project in particular, there was many years of research that came before me actually having any design proposals. I first started doing research on this reservation in 2010, so 15 years ago. I had a research fellowship from Columbia to better understand the intersection of housing, infrastructure, and economy on Cheyenne River. So the Cheyenne River Reservation is the poorest county in the United States. And all 7 Lakota reservations in the United States are in the top 10 poorest counties. And so that project was to better understand what were the conditions on these specific reservations, not just the houses, but how the infrastructure was laid out and how the reservations were planned, how that might have prevented growth and economic development and cultural development. And so, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was saying, it sounds like such a big challenge. If the historical and traditional basis that you start with is a TP, a mobile society of people who pack up their house and move down the road, it sounds like there really was no historical context for permanent housing that would last for years or through generations. You're almost inventing that as you go, aren't you?
In many ways, yes, you're spot on with that. And that's what makes it so challenging, is to do it in a way that the community feels like they have some ownership over that design, and that design is responsive to their cultural needs. Um, so, but what I was going to say is that research project, I would interview people in their homes and ask them, what they liked, what they didn't like, how they wish they could be living, if they could have anything with a home, what would that be? And then anytime somebody was like, oh, somebody did something different, they built a house themselves and they did use this technology or whatever, I would go visit that. So I sort of had a catalog of what HUD had done versus what individuals had done or other community-based organizations. So at least there was like some sort of starting point to reference.
Wow, what a commitment of time and effort and resources. If I were to design, and as a bad architect, as someone who has no talent in this area, I would think, well, how do I make something permanent that looks like a TP? But I'm guessing that's not the approach that you took.
Well, a lot of people did ask for a roundhouse. So you're not actually that far off base, because spiritually this circle, you have a future in architecture. But in the end, instead, we tried to sort of translate some of the things that the teepee was doing into the permanent form. So
tell me,
so
that's
like
interesting.
one of the things that, like, when a traditional teepee camp is set up, they would form it in a circle. So I laid the houses out in a circle, and I assumed everybody would face into the community gathering space, but I was informed that actually everything had to face east or southeast, because you needed to welcome the spirits in the morning as they, I guess how do they describe it? The morning star, which is the last star to leave the sky in the morning. You greet that through your door, through your entranceway, which faces east. And so that's the way the traditional teepee camp was set up. And also, in alignment with that, all the doors had to be glass so that you would have that visual connection to the outside in the morning, the eastern sun. And so that was one way. Another way is just like the simple peak of the roof sort of mimics the peak of the teepee. And then the other thing we did was, on each of the houses, there was blank canvas on 3 sides for artwork, where community members were commissioned to make pieces about like scenes from Lakota life, which teepees used to have designs on them that also talked about like scenes from Lakota life. So those were just a few of the ways we incorporated specifically like the teepee into the design.
And are these houses outfitted with modern conveniences? Are there appliances or air conditioning, or well, how modern do they become?
Oh, they're very modern. Maybe a little more modern than most things out there. The kitchens are IKEA. They're all flat panel. They have
Nice.
stoves and ovens, microwaves, a refrigerator. They have an all-in-one washer dryer. All of them have ADA showers, toilets, and sinks. The heating is electric. It's heating and cooling. It's a mini split system. Those walnut units.
Sure.
And we literally, well, it's not 100% confirmed, but we're 95% confirmed that we have funding now to put solar on all the buildings, because they're all electric, and get a battery backup so that they can operate when they lose power, which is common in the area.
Okay. And this was something that the folks wanted, right? I mean, they wanted these modern things, even if though none of that stuff existed in their traditional housing, right?
Yes and no. So, I mean, I would say traditionally they always wanted to harness the energy that the earth provides. So, the idea of
Okay.
having the house run on solar power is actually very much so in line with their traditional
Ah, yes.
beliefs.
Yes.
And the teepee itself actually was very interesting in its shape. Its shape not only is just like easy to construct, but also they have really high winds on the prairies. And the conical shape of the teepee is actually very good for wind to pass around. So, I mean, I think that they actually had a real understanding of how nature works. When I was tasked to do this building, they were also asked that I sort of harness any energy that I can from the built environment or the natural environment,
Hmm.
rather than rely on fossil fuels or something like that to operate the
Yeah.
building. And so the we have electric, but also the envelope of the building is very good. It's designed to passive house standards.
You know, at the Global Housing Foundation, as we deal with a lot of these issues, we often find that there are interesting and complex trust building processes that go on here as folks from outside come into a community and need to work with the people who are there, develop some trust, make people feel like you're on their side. Was there any of that dynamic in these conversations?
I mean, 100%. So I even before I started research in 2010, I first came to this reservation in 1997 when I was a teenager. I was with a volunteer group from a YMCA on the East Coast here. And one summer at camp, they were like, you could either stay at camp and do dishes or you could go work on this reservation. And so we ran daycare and built a playground all summer long, basically. And that summer, though, what I met the man who was our host was this guy Ben Elkeagle, who's now a Lakota elder, and I've stayed in touch with him since I was a teenager. And so I would say he none of this would be possible without that friendship that I have with Ben. Because when in 2010 I came to do the research on housing, I lived with Ben and his wife for many weeks out there, and they introduced me to so many people. And just the very act of coming back over and over again has built trust. And now I have friends from the reservation who have visited me here in New York, which is a real treat. But I would say that working in a community like this, the more you return, the stronger the bond is.
Hmm. So if you could just shown up in South Dakota one day and say, "Hi, I'm your architect," I gather you would have had a very different experience.
I don't know that anyone would have spoken to me. Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't even
Talk.
know where to start on a reservation like this, you know?
Yeah, yeah, it's so easy. Talk with us if you can about some of the practicalities here. How is it decided who gets to live in these houses? Is there a process there? What's the level of need? How far into the process have you guys gone? Because there are all of these practicalities that need to be overcome, aren't there?
Yeah, so there's a bunch in there. So, in terms of who's living in the house, we have a committee that is made up of YMCA of the Seven Council Fires trustees and board of directors. So the board of directors are local to the reservation. The trustees, we are around the country, and most of the trustees are actually YMCA people. So we have several people on the committee who are housing specialists in their own, state wherever they're running a Y. And then we also have somebody from the YMCA archives who's also a specialist in housing. Anyway, so we came up with a list of questions and criteria for the application process, and there was a blind application, so the Y didn't know who was applying, and sort of there were two rounds before it was unblinded, basically.
Hmm. And what are you looking
And
for? What are you looking for?
so we said that they had to be employed. They had to show at least a month's worth of employment, and there was a credit check, and that they had to. I don't think they had to take a drug test, but there's no drugs allowed. They had to sign something that said they would not use drugs there, and they had to write a little bit about why they wanted to be part of the community. And
Hmm.
this sort of ties into the other question, which was what's the need? And the need, there's currently about 700-person wait list at the Housing Authority for housing. So there's a
Mm.
major overcrowding issue in homes. And so the whole project was sort of instigated by the fact that specifically young people who are like in their 20s and 30s who should really be launching are living at home. And well, sometimes it's nice to have family support when there's 20 people in a 3-bedroom with 1 bath. It starts to just be an uncomfortable situation and hard for you to, do your day-to-day things that you need to do to be an adult. And so this is the community that we're building or have built is designed to help support young people launch. So, for example, we were going to have somebody speak from the community today, but she delivered her baby earlier on Tuesday. So she's unavailable.
Oh well, we're happy to have you here with us. Talk about control of that. I mean, do people own the housing? Is it rented? Is it passed through generations? How do you anticipate all of that working?
With these tiny homes, they're currently owned by the
Yes.
YMCA of the 7 Council Fires, and people pay rent and they pay their utilities. It's definitely below market rate right now.
Uh-huh.
And I think one of the things our committee has discussed is actually basing it on a percentage of income, which is more similar to the way HUD does it. But right now, it's just a fixed low rate.
I see. But because one of the things I can imagine you want to do is make people feel like this is their home, right? There's some sense of if not legal ownership, at least some kind of sense of propriety over that home and taking responsibility for it. Of course, are those issues that you guys have grappled with at all?
So I think it would be amazing if ultimately these became ownership units. I know like HUD and Habitat for Humanity have built some communities that were rent to own, for example.
Uh-huh.
And also there has been discussion of partnering with a local community CDFI that does loans and helps get people get mortgages. So one of the things on the reservation that makes it really hard to develop for people is that you can't get a traditional mortgage on your property. So, like the way most Americans leverage their capital if they own is by taking out a mortgage. But
Of
because
course.
the land on the reservation is held in trust by the US government, it has no value to a bank. So only the house has value. So
That
that
complicates
makes it
things.
very hard to
Yeah.
build.
Yeah.
But there are organizations on the reservation that help people get loans. And one of my hopes with the project is that if and when we build more houses, that we actually partner with them so that they can help people get financing and own the house basically outright from day one. And there are special structured, like there's Native American banks who will lend um, to people on reservations and things like that. The
That's interesting.
houses are
So,
prefabricated. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
go ahead. No, finish your thought.
Well, I was just going to say that the houses are prefabricated. They're made in a factory actually in South Dakota. They come in
Mhm.
panels, but they're pre-cut, so they're very easy to assemble. So if we were to build another community, you just call up the company and say, I need X number of houses, and they mass produce, and the wall comes fully formed, and you just assemble it like Legos, basically.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, you feel like a project like this is scalable? I mean, you could do this 10 times the resources and the place to do it?
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, that's one of
Yeah.
the reasons we chose this building technique is the construction season's very short out there too, because of the snow and the extreme weather
Mhm.
conditions. So like you really need to be enclosed fast so that what you're doing doesn't get ruined by some weird weather event.
Yeah. Well, listen, if you have a 700-person waiting list, and there might be others who would turn up if the list weren't so discouragingly or frustratingly long, what the units of housing that you guys are providing have got to be vastly nicer than where people were coming from. How are people living? Those who are not living in these houses, what's the competition?
Um, well, so like the most extreme is like 20 people in a house. And I have been in houses like that. And I've been in houses after they've been evicted for having 20 people because HUD will eventually, you know, put a stop to it. And often things like mold developed in the homes because there's just like way too much going, if the shower is running all day long, like the bathroom can't sustain that kind of use or whatever it is, or where I've really seen the
Mhm.
mold growth is what happens is people start living in the cellar because there's nowhere else to live and the cellar's not insulated. So in the winter you get moisture on the walls and then eventually you get mold. So, that's the extreme worst case scenario. And part of what's happening there too is that culturally in Lakota culture, it's very hard to say no to your family. So like setting a boundary and being like, no, you can't move in here is not really an option, which is part of why the board of directors for the Y insisted that these be tiny homes, because it would just make it impossible to overcrowd the homes because they're just not large enough. But their idea was that like a family unit, a larger extended family, could live in several of the homes together, which is more analogous to the way the teepees were, where it's like you have your own space, but you're living together in a community.
There's a little bit of privacy compared to the 20 folks in the same structure. The mechanics of all this, I think, are very interesting to people. As you guys were designing these homes and figuring out which should go in them and which approach to take, was this something that as architects you had a free hand in doing, or was there a lot of outside limitations on this? And what does it cost to build one of these homes?
Oh, that's such a good question. I would say, well, so we had a funder, the YMCA National Service Project, which is a it's basically retired Y executives who want to do good, and they adopt
Okay,
another.
great.
They elected to basically adopt this Y and build this project. Like we applied with this concept, and they said, "Yeah, let's do it." So they definitely had some opinions, and sometimes, like in the beginning they wanted to build 8 houses, but the Y wanted 4 quality houses. Like for the amount of money we had, like you could have built like 8 really crappy houses or 4 really nice houses. So there were
Mhm.
moments like that where we had to push back and say, well, the board of directors really thinks it would be better, for the long-term maintenance of these homes, that they're built well and that they're, loved and, you know, feel good, rather than like just providing the roof that we were talking about before. Or like they didn't want to fund the solar, so we had to find that funding elsewhere, which is totally fine. I mean, we're so grateful for the funding, but obviously, like money does pay a factor in design.
Sure, of
Um,
course.
so, but the homes, like the physical house itself, is around. I feel like I have this number at my fingertips on my desk, somewhere around $150 a home. But then the infrastructure to get there is and the concrete and stuff like that, it's like another $50,000, because the site had no water, um, and the concrete's very expensive to pour out there, so the foundation was a real challenge.
Mhm.
And we had to get sewer from the town. All of the bureaucratics of the infrastructure were actually one of the more challenging aspects of the project.
Yeah. One of the issues that often comes up in building in remote places, and particularly with underserved populations, is once the housing, the specific basics of the housing need are solved, often there's a lot of other stuff that factors in. I mean, anything from job training and social needs and substance abuse and mental health efforts. And is that something that as architects and builders and housing providers you get into, or is it like, listen, we're going to do what we do, and other people will have to worry about that other stuff?
So I would say in a typical job, that's beyond my scope. But
Mhm.
because I kind of wear 2 hats here, and I am a trustee on this WISE board of trustees, and because I'm part of the housing committee, those are things that we discuss. How to connect people to resources if the Y can't provide them directly. The substance abuse thing came up. Somebody applied and said they wanted to make sure that they would have access to substance abuse therapy or whatnot, groups. Um, and so, yeah, I mean, conceptually, with the idea of supportive housing, you need to think about how to really like do more than just the house, especially for a community that suffered so much trauma. Um, you know, to really make them feel like one of the things they talk about, actually at camp, at the YMCA camp, is like setting up the space so that somebody doesn't feel embarrassed if they don't have something, like if they can't afford to have sheets or something like that, that all of those
Mhm.
things can be provided without somebody feeling uncomfortable asking. Um, but so like the Y has set up some programs. One of them is with the South Dakota State University is doing healthy cooking classes with the residents, because one of the things like historically the US government has provided commodities, which is similar to food stamps, but they're like old-fashioned rations basically. But it's
Mhm.
obviously not the best food. So, teaching people how to eat better, provide for their kids, etc., is one of the programs. And we're also working with a social worker to do sort of post occupancy discussions about the homes and how people feel in them and what they might want more of, or whatever they want to talk about, really.
Well, Annie, you speak very passionately about this. It's obviously something that has touched you, both in a professional and a personal way. Have there been surprises that you've been confronted with here, either in terms of people's reactions to the houses, or if you have a chance to visit with people after they've moved in, things that you weren't expecting?
Well, so people just moved in last month, so I'm like
Okay.
really want to get back there. I mean, I met Tina, the woman who I was hoping would speak. I met her virtually last week, but so I don't really know
We'll see. We'll
how.
see.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, in the design process, there were surprises. Like I was saying, I just assumed that everybody would face the center of the circle, because like that's just what I thought circles were about. And
Right. We've watched too many movies that make us think that kind of stuff, right?
exactly, exactly. I mean, I was
Uh,
surprised thus far. The feedback's been overwhelmingly positive, and I'm always like nervous about whether the intervention has gone, you know, has been thoughtful enough. But it still remains to be seen. But like we at the grand opening, the tribal chairman came, and he was really excited about it. And he was like so tall. He was over 7 feet tall, and I was like, the doors aren't tall
wish,
enough.
right. I wish I knew to give you giraffe doors here. It would have been, would have been better. Listen, it's always, I think, so interesting when we really are talking about a mixing of cultures, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you didn't grow up on a reservation. I mean, now it sounds like you had an interest in these topics as a younger person, but it's not the same as having come out of that culture or growing up there. Did you find these exchanges easy, comfortable, natural, weird, confusing, perplexing? Talk about yeah, I mean, I can imagine the tone of the conversations you must have had along the way.
I think one of the hardest things is actually getting people to ask for something, because I oftentimes people are just like so grateful that you're doing something and that you cared. And I think because there's been so much trauma, it's sort of instilled in them that they don't have a right to like ask. So like when I would present to the board of directors the designs, they'd be like, "Great," and I'd be like, "But like,
Yes,
do you have
but
any
right.
feedback?" you know. But like people like Ben, who I've known for like many, many years, will directly tell me, if he has ideas. Like he feels very comfortable sharing. So, I sort of rely on the people that I'm closer with to on the side give me the feedback, because as a group, I've found that like when I meet with people in groups, like they're just they just say thank you. And so
Mhm.
that's been one of the more challenging things, because I can tell you that my clients in New York have no problem telling me what they want and how they feel.
I hear you. Annie Combs, it sounds like this was a commission that you were born for and have been preparing for at least for half of your life. Congratulations on what you guys have achieved so far. And I see no reason why you shouldn't do it 100 times over or 200 times over. I just think you need to get busy and start doing it.
I sure hope so.
All right, good of you to join us today. Very much appreciated.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate the conversation.
From service to stability, that's what we're calling this one. We send people in the name of our country to fight wars overseas, to defend us from our nation's enemies, to risk their own lives, often watching their colleagues suffer horrific results, sometimes giving the ultimate sacrifice, and then they come back to live with us again. And those experiences in the military have got to take a toll on people, and we know that they do. And it leaves the rest of us with some responsibility to help our service members reintegrate into civilian life. It's never easy. There's an array of issues that returning vets confront, and at the very top of the list, along with questions like healthcare and job training and mental health treatment, up right at the top of that list is the question of housing. Where are these returning service members going to live? And are we going to be able to provide some sort of a transitional housing to help them go from their time of service to their time back in civilian life? It's an awesome responsibility, a complicated one, often and expensive and politicized one. Here to help us navigate some of those challenges, Brad Fields is with the organization Homes for Heroes Foundation, and they are right in the middle of this struggle. Brad, good of you to join us here.
Thanks for having me, Ellis. I appreciate it.
Yeah, so have I exaggerated these challenges? My God, they sound daunting to me.
No, I would say, if anything, you've understated it. I speak from a point of view from Canada. We currently have 10,000 homeless veterans living on the streets of Canada, and by our standards at the foundation, one homeless veteran is one too many. So, yeah, they're coming home to with PTSD, addiction issues, job stability, financial insecurity. All the stuff that a lot of people struggle with on a daily basis, but through their service, in a lot of cases, it's exacerbated some of the issues, and it's made it difficult for them to transition back into a stable civilian life.
So let's start at the very beginning of this. When somebody serves our nation, whatever our nation is, when they go over and put their lives on the line to serve our nation, what do we owe them in return?
Dignity, respect, housing, at a bare minimum. These people, men and women, have served, our prospective countries. Some of them maybe have never left the continent, maybe never served overseas, but make no mistake, while you're in service, there's a great sacrifice. And then, of course, we've got some of our veterans that have witnessed the ultimate sacrifice with their comrades. And so, at bare minimum, the respect and dignity that they've served their country. And make no mistake about it, armed forces in general doesn't pay well. So it's not like they're going into service to earn a big paycheck. They're doing it because they're looking to serve their country and benefit others. So yeah, at bare minimum, respect, dignity, housing, healthcare, the list goes on and on.
So let's talk about what I would call the centrality of housing. Very difficult to deal with a lot of those other things you mentioned unless you have a stable place to live, right? I mean, that's pretty important, isn't it?
No question. I'm lucky enough to. My wife is a psychologist, so I jokingly say I get all my counseling for free, whether I want it or not. But she's enlightened me on a lot of the situations, with homeless people that struggle on a day-to-day basis with fight or flight. They're really living. Where are they sleeping tonight? Where are they going to get their next meal? Are they going to be attacked? Are they going to be robbed? So it's very difficult for them to even navigate, God forbid, just their PTSD or their own mental health issues when they're in fight or flight mode. So having that home base where they can feel safe and secure gives them a starting point.
Mm-hmm. So, when we think about homeless vets, right, our minds go to the most extreme and visible version, right? The guy sleeping on a heating grate on a sidewalk in the middle of the winter. And clearly those are some of the cases, but am I right? You guys deal with a wide array of housing challenges for veterans, and they're not always as visible as that guy on the heating grate.
Yeah, we phrase it as the hidden homeless, and because typically veterans don't show up at the local shelters or the drop-in centers and so forth. They'll sleep in their vehicles. They'll couch surf. But yeah, they typically don't self-identify. That's the other thing, is tracking the numbers of homeless veterans is difficult because of pride and because of shame. They don't typically self-identify. So even if they're in a shelter they're doing a head count and someone says, any veterans in here tonight, they quite often won't identify because they're ashamed of being a veteran and being in that situation. So yeah, the posters that you see, the TV commercials that we all see where you see that veteran living on the street, there's no question, yes, that exists, but the vast majority are hidden homeless. You just don't see them. They're there, but you just don't see them.
Okay, so let's talk about some of the practicalities here. An organization like Homes for Heroes and others doing this kind of work, what are the most useful things you can do? We're talking about steering people to programs that already exist. We're talking about trying to create new housing. We're talking about providing support services for those who may have a roof over their head but need something beyond that. Where do you think the most effective ways to target those efforts are?
Yeah, I mean that's the challenge is because every journey is their own, and they work at their own pace. And so, what might work for one veteran won't work for another, and they could be in the same similar case, but it's just not aligned. So that's the challenge. Is you have to make that connection with each veteran one on one, and find out what their particular challenges are, and then work at their pace and navigate through to the end where we can get them into successful stability within their own living accommodations. So it is a challenge because it's not cookie cutter. But with our foundation, our plan or our goal is it's a program first. The housing is kind of the byproduct of it. It's a place to start. But we believe as a general rule that just getting someone off the streets into a house, yes, that provides that safe, secure, stable environment, but it's actually not curing or navigating the challenges that put them on the street to begin with. So without a program in place or that social support services, you're really not fixing anything other than just the immediate safety and security of having a roof over your head.
So what are some of the other things that we're talking about? What other kind of services do you mean?
Oh, well, obviously mental health, addiction issues. Addiction runs rampant within the veteran community. So definitely addiction support, job
Hmm.
security. Sometimes we get a veteran in that is just literally lost their job. They, aren't challenged with mental health or severe mental health issues or PTSD. They're just need stability. Sometimes it's a divorce or a family breakup that puts a veteran on the street. So yeah, there's a multitude of reasons what gets them in that position, but job security, addiction counseling, support services, PTSD, sometimes it's life skills. We tell this story all the time. We will get a veteran, male or female, that lived in a typical two-parent household. They graduated from high school. Their mother or father took care of their needs at home. They went straight into the military, possibly served for 30 years in the military. And the same thing, while they're in the military, their laundry's done for them, their meals are provided, and so forth. And they come out at age 40 or 50 years of age, and they've never cooked a meal for themselves or never done their own laundry. So sometimes it's just as simple as life skills training.
You know, Brett, when I talk to my veteran friends, and these are not just folks who are struggling as severely as some of your clients may be, but they all say one thing, which is that one of the toughest parts of adjustment is missing the guys they serve with, the men and women who were part of their unit, a part of their platoon, that they felt a connection there, a shared purpose, a sense of identity there. And then when they come out, and those people, of course, scatter with the wind. They live in all different places. They're not in daily contact with each other. That there's a sense of isolation that comes in that transitional period that is often very hard for folks to overcome and replace. Do you find that?
Yeah, no question. That's why we design our villages the way we do. It harkens back to their time in the military. They're all inward-facing units. It creates that community, that support services. You often hear the term, "We've got your six, we've got your back." That's what we operate on. It's that peer support. There's no question when you're coming out of time in service that you're kind of caught, halfway in between, in that purgatory, because you're coming home and maybe you're talking to your civilian friends or family members that don't understand what you've gone through, but you don't have your comrades to lean on. And so, yeah, you're right. You're in a little bit of a no-go zone where you're trapped.
Well, you know, here at the Global Housing Foundation, we're constantly looking for practical solutions to issues just like this one. And one of them it does involve things like the villages that you guys have worked to put together. Can you describe, just in very practical terms, what they're like, who's there, how somebody gets into it, and exactly what kind of services they're provided, how long people stay? Just give us some of those basics, if you would. I think people would find that very interesting.
Sure. Yeah. So in Canada right now, we have three villages, Calgary, Edmonton, and Kingston, Ontario, with two more villages under construction. They are typically 15 to 25 units. These are smaller, tiny homes. So they range, somewhere between 310 to 350 square feet. We do that intentionally, the design of those, because anything bigger than that creates a issue of possibly hoarding. There's too much space, which creates the security issue. And so if there's too much space, they'll fill that space to feel secure and safe. So we design them small and manageable. Each one of them has their own kitchen. It's set up for independent living. We also have an on-site resource center with two full-time caseworkers that help them navigate Veterans Affairs, healthcare issues. They do counseling as well. So all that, job training, rewriting someone's resume, writing a resume for the first time, helping them get government issue ID. That's a challenge I love to talk about. It's in Canada here, they recognize you as a veteran. They will send you a pension check. But a lot of our homeless veterans don't have actual government issue ID, like a driver's license of sorts. And it is very tough to open up a bank account without government issue ID. So the government recognizes you as a citizen or a veteran that served their country, but to get a photo ID when you have nothing to start with is very difficult. So some of those are just bureaucracy that we have to navigate through. And then, of course, Veterans Affairs can be difficult. Any government agency at the best of times can be full of bureaucracy. So that's tough to do. But yeah, these villages are going to be scattered across Canada in most major urban centers. And we typically get our veterans through reference, through Veterans Affairs Canada or other partner agencies where, they know of a veteran that is struggling or at risk of being homeless, and they introduce us. We do an intake process to see if they're a fit. We also expect from our veterans that they commit to the program. This is not just a housing where you can just come in and not work the program. So it's expected of the veteran that they come in, they work the program, because our intention is that you transition onto successful independent civilian life. And that can range anywhere from 6 to 24 months. There's no actual time frame of how long you can stay in the village, but that's typical. Around 12-month stay is typical in our villages.
And so what's the hard part here? Is it raising money? Is it getting local approval to create these facilities? Is it finding vets who need them? Where are the choke points here?
Finding vets not the issue. We've got 10,000 in Canada, so that's not the issue. Raising money, of course, working with government agencies. Here we have to work with all three levels of government, municipal, because we're building in that city, provincially or state funding. We look for support there. And then, of course, federal funding as well. So, and then private donations. So typically, Homes for Heroes operates on about 35-40% of government funding. The rest of the money has to be raised privately, through corporate donations and private donations. So, it's a lot of work. I spend a good majority of my time just making sure that we have, the funds in the bank to not only expand our program, but also maintain the existing program that we have in place.
Yeah, because one of the things I think that has happened historically in the world of veteran services is that when people are focused on wars, right, when it's a big part of the news and there's controversy and debate, and then there are questions of large numbers of returning vets coming home, there tends to be a lot of public attention on that. And it's probably easier, I'm guessing, to raise money at those times. But these issues linger on, right? I mean, these things can go on for years or decades. I mean, in the States, we still are dealing with challenges involving Vietnam vets who served, nearly half a century ago in some cases. And I think the public attention begins to fade over time. Have you noticed that in your work?
Yeah, we just look at it as on a yearly basis. Our version of Memorial Day is Remembrance Day, November 11th, which we just passed. And of
Sure.
course, all the attention goes towards the veterans at that time of year, and our donations increase at that time of the year. But then everybody takes the poppies off their lapels, and they go back to their daily life, and then they forget that these veterans served all year round, and they're still at risk of being homeless or living on the streets. So yeah, there's no question. A lot of our work is also advocacy and making sure that the general population knows that there's veterans. I've had a veteran in our village at 80 years of age, served his country, hadn't served his country in 50 plus years. But ended up on homeless just because he had a family breakup situation. So we get range anywhere from early 20s all the way to 80 years of age that we're working with and supporting. So yeah, there's no question we have to advocate on behalf of veterans all year round.
Yeah, Brett, I love the way the village sounds. I mean, it sounds like you've figured out a way to deal not just with four walls, a ceiling, and a floor, but recognizing that housing is a platform from which other needs and services can be dealt with. But so what would you do if we could change something, or something in the world, or government, or policy could be adjusted that would make this work easier, more effective, broader in its reach? What are we doing wrong? What could we do better here, do you think?
Well, I mean, there's a number of fronts, but I guess, none of these type of programs exist without funding and government support. So I think what happens, especially in Canada here, is it's always politicized. And we need to take that out of the calculation, I guess, and put some policies in place, put some laws in place regarding our veteran population, that it doesn't matter who's in power politically, those fundamentals don't change. And we have a 4-year election cycle, very similar to the US. And we find that every 4 years, we're having to change or fight hard because the next incoming political party wants to change it, make it their own. And in the meantime, they leave veterans standing in the wings waiting for support. So, I would say, for sure, take away the political side of veteran support. That would be a start, and find the funding. I mean, and again, I really struggle with this because our veterans deserve better at the end of the day. And I think to keep them in the light, keep them at the forefront of all the discussions is imperative. And it's just not. And we just need the funding. We need the support services. And that doesn't say, I don't want to say that our government officials, it's with malice. These people, the people we deal with at governments, they care, but their hands are tied. Bureaucracy gets in the way. I often say, instead of listening to a veteran story and opening up a guidebook and reading from the guidebook or the policy book, just listen with your heart, and you'll find a way to help and support that veteran. And that's the challenge that we face on a daily basis.
Can you talk a little bit about the challenge of isolation that so many vets feel, and the importance of creating some kind of community that allows them to feel some dignity and frankly, get some practical help along the way?
Yeah, and it's we see this all the time. We'll have a homeless veteran that's been living in that fight or flight situation, as I mentioned earlier, and they'll come into a safe, stable home situation where they have a place, and what we'll find is it's counterintuitive. They will actually having that peace where they're not worrying about where their next meal is coming from or where they're going to sleep, actually allows them time to, now the demons start showing up, because when they're living on the streets, they don't have time for that. They're literally fighting for their life every day. And there's no time for the demons or to talk about what's going on. And sometimes we see a negative reaction when a veteran moves into a safe, stable house, because now they have peace. They have time to think about their past and reflect on their life. And so
that's frustrating.
Super frustrating. And it's counterintuitive because you're thinking, in my initial time, like, geez, we took them from the street where they're at risk. Now they're living in a stable environment with, 3 square meals a day and they're safe and so forth. And now they're acting out and now they've been triggered. And now all this stuff comes out and you're like, it didn't make sense. But until I talked to professionals, until I talked to my lovely wife, she explained that to me. And I'm like, okay, now I get it. Now that's not always the case, but that's some of the challenges is their reaction once they get safe, stable housing. So beyond that, again, that camaraderie, having a neighbor next door that you can trust, having a neighbor next door that has gone through what you've gone through, and you can talk. It's very difficult. What I've recognized, even as long as I've been with the organization, it takes me sometimes days, weeks, months, and sometimes I'll never be able to connect with a specific veteran because they don't trust me. Not because I'm a bad guy, they just don't feel that connection. So there's no question building trust, building that sense of community within our villages is key, but it takes time.
That's interesting, and it really does take sometimes a transition to transition housing.
Yeah.
I know you have a chance to talk with a lot of vets. Do you ever ask a veteran who you guys have been working with, what does home mean to you? What is it that these vets are seeking? What is their concept of home, do you think?
Yeah, we hear this all the time: safety, security, that something in the back of your mind that you're always on edge, you're always on guard. Having that home for them takes away that need to be, your head on a pivot because you don't know where you're at risk. So that's to start with, and a place where they can heal. We use that phrase all the time. Every veteran's journey is their own, and the healing takes time. And we provide that healing atmosphere where you come out when you're ready, you talk when you're ready. We'll draw it out of you the best we can, but if it takes longer, then it takes longer. So just a place where they can collect their thoughts and reflect, but at the same time getting the safety and security of having that home, that roof over their head.
That's inspiring stuff. Brad Fields is with Homes for Heroes Foundation, working with vets across Canada, pursuing some ideas that I think might be of interest and of value to folks all around the world. Brad, good of you to join us today.
Thanks for having me on.
Honor at home, why housing is the first step to healing our veterans. That's what we're calling this segment. Very happy to have you along for the ride. When folks return from war or military service, they are faced with just a wide array of challenges as they try to reintegrate into civilian life. I mean, you know some of the things. It could include housing, it could include job training, mental health, and emotional challenges, and missing the men and women that you served with and got such support from. We're truly asking people to reorient their lives in real time, in a real hurry, in a society where people are often not showing any special assistance and respect to those people who did their time and served our country. Trying to change that, trying to make that better. Joining us today, Lonnie Sherman is the co-founder, president of General Needs, and has been right in the middle of these one-on-one efforts to try and help America's veterans reintegrate back into society and live productive, happy, successful lives. Lonnie, good of you to join us today.
Thank you. This is an awesome opportunity and an honor to be on the show with you guys today. Thank you.
So listen, we all know people who've served, right? I mean, I think even though most of us don't serve, I think that it's probably fair to say that we all know some people who do. But you being right in the middle of this, are there aspects to this reintegration that a lot of people just don't understand or underestimate? How would you explain that?
Oh, you know what? Awesome. Nobody understands it and everybody underestimates it. Everybody, including the VA, including the physicians, everybody out there, the whole community underestimates what it takes to get better. Our biggest project is the housing project, which we're talking about today. But I'm going to step a little bit. The most important piece to start helping a veteran is a pair of underwear.
Underwear?
Go back to our logo, which is probably on my shoulder a little bit. We started General Needs when we learned that homeless veterans living at the VA, everybody donates clothes all the time, but nobody donates underwear. Nobody donates socks or old t-shirts. And I remember talking to some men and women that were there. This is way back in 2008, 2009. And their big question to me is, hey, can you help me with underwear? I have a coat. I got, things that I need, but can you help with underwear? And even going on throughout the years, and this time of year specifically, I'm thinking about a gentleman I met a few years back in St. Albans, Queens, at a shelter at the VA in St. Albans. And I gave him our duffel bag, which we'll talk about today. And he had some new underwear and socks and T-shirts, all the things that he needed. And he starts crying profusely. I'm like, okay, dude, what's going on? And I joke around a lot. We'll talk a little bit about more. The way I work in these shelters is we have fun. We don't make it that we're, having to do this as a chore. We do it as a great project. And he said his mom told him, imagine this, everybody. His mom told him he couldn't go to church unless he had clean underwear. He hasn't had a pair in months. And we brought something that typically you don't get. We brought 4X. It's not something that's a Walmart or Target special. And he was able to have a pair of underwear to go to church. That changed his life. That's the first step. Matter of fact, one of our initial founders with me, Dr. Mitchell Scherer, is a psychologist, had a hot stroke. He said, sometimes you can affect people more with some socks and underwear than you can with therapy sessions. So that's what we do. That's the root of General Needs. Through giving underwear and meeting these men and women who are amazing, what can that pair of underwear do? Or way back when we learned that it was the middle of November and it was real cold out. And we're at the VA and I was getting ready to bring underwear and I got a call from the woman running it at the time. It was Salvation Army facility at the Northport VA, no longer there, run by another great organization, Beacon House. She said, Lonnie, the guys are walking around with flip-flops. It's like sleeting out. What can you do? We literally went to Costco and we bought about 50 pair of boots. Had to go to 2 different Costco's just to get enough sizes. And brought the boots up to the VA. Guess what happened? Half a dozen of those guys got jobs because they had a pair of boots. So we keep making things rocket science. We keep saying, okay, we need to bring 17 PhDs and 14 doctors in. But how about a pair of boots is going to help somebody get a job and have some dignity again?
So what is it that you think we're doing as a society that is just failing here that we could actually improve? Obviously, there are some limits on resources. Some of these folks' stories are complex, and there's an array of issues that need to be resolved. But somehow or another, it seems like we're doing something wrong as we send folks back into civilian life from the military, often unequipped to deal with those next steps. Is that right?
Exactly right. And, and they're not getting the medical and the psychological care that they need. I have a truck loaded right now, and I'm actually tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. heading to New Jersey. And I'm going to see a veteran that I know. I've met him 5 or 6 years ago. His name is Gunny. And Gunny's got a dog. Actually, it's a Marine dog. The dog's name is Sarge. And Gunny was staying at a veteran residence, probably 60 veterans living in this location. Not really homeless, but just getting their feet back together, their own place, their own little apartment, their own refrigerator, which is my definition of homelessness is when you don't have your own refrigerator. You have a refrigerator that's yours, you're not homeless. If you don't have a refrigerator, you're homeless. Whether you're surfing in somebody's house and couch surfing, which is a whole nother problem for women, and we can do a show on that one. If you don't have a fridge, you're homeless. But so they kicked him out because his dog wasn't on a leash. And there's a certain rule in that facility that you have to have a leashed dog. He's now in an emergency shelter in Clinton, New Jersey. I'm heading there tomorrow with 50 brand new coats to give to the men and women that are there. Then I will head back to that residence at the Lions VA and make sure that the guys living in those apartments are going to have a brand new coat this year as well. So simple things. It's not hard. We talked about the resources. Give me the resource for one F-15. And we'll save hundreds of veterans' lives.
Yeah. Now, at the Global Housing Foundation, of course, we think about housing, right? I mean, it's a hugely important issue that if you don't have your housing together, it's often hard to deal with any of those other things, having stable employment, getting the mental health treatment that you might need, reestablishing social context, having some sense of dignity. So how do you build out from there, though? I mean, say we can find that rudimentary, basic housing opportunity, but so I mean, how do you integrate that in with all those other things?
Follow up, buddy check. So we got
Okay.
to see a vet that we've known for a while. And I never do this. We had an extra couch or something to deliver. It was kind of weird, and normally they're delivered by one of our partners, and this time I had to do it. So we go meet this veteran, moved into this brand new nice apartment. We brought over a TV, we brought some other items, some other organization helped get him set up. And it turns out that this veteran has a drinking problem. So we said, are you in a program? Are you doing anything? He said, no, they just sent me here. So one of the problems that our wonderful system's doing is there's no follow-up. Housing's great. Having your own apartment is great. Having your place to live, the little house is great, whatever we're talking about. But unless there's not an intense program that's going to say, hey, how are you doing today? What are you thinking? What's going on in your head? Unless we're not doing follow-ups, I'm going to say that 3 times, follow-up, buddy check. That's the most important thing we can do once we get these men and women in these apartments. Matter of fact, recently they reached out to us, the social workers at the VA. They said, look, you're bringing a toaster oven, you're bringing a microwave, we're bringing the dishes, all the other stuff, but they're very isolated once they get their own place. After being with 20, 30, 40 other veterans at the same time, can you help with a TV? And we now deliver TVs to every apartment that we furnish, just so there's some connection with the outside world.
So, Lonnie, when I talk to my veteran friends, especially those who are freshly out, one of the things that many of them say to me is that what they miss, maybe more than anything, is the camaraderie they had with their buddies, with their unit, with people who felt like they had each other's back. And that when they return into civilian world, of course, they're scattered around the country, they're living in different situations, even if they can email back and forth or join a Facebook group or something. It's not exactly the same as having those people in their lives. How big do you think the issue of isolation is?
Huge. They need to talk, and vets are notoriously not good at talking what they've been through. I won't get many answers from them. The peer-to-peer programs that we see around the country that are popping up are usually successful. Any place that, a lot of organizations are trying to do housing now. And they talk to me, well, we're going to do this housing. My first question to them is, again, what's your follow-up? Are you bringing any teams in? Is there any one-on-one programs? Is there any group programs going on? It's as important doing that as important to get a nice place to live.
What do you see the challenges are to creating decent housing for veterans? I mean, why is it so hard? Why is it so slow?
Resources, financially, number one. And the groups that are doing it, not all of them, but a lot of them have no idea what kind of follow-up and what kind of care is needed. They just feel you're going to put in get this nice garden apartment. We'll put some tomatoes out in front. And now everybody's going to be perfect. No, maybe if it's going to be a veteran community, maybe there needs to be peer-to-peer meetings every single day. Do what you said. What you said a few minutes ago, that vets are, they feel isolated because they don't have their friends and their camaraderie. Let's see what we can do to change that.
Yeah.
It's a simple thing. We go visit veterans after we put them in apartments. We'll show up with an air fryer, and it starts a conversation. Well, let's check this thing out.
Yeah. How does this thing work?
Feel human
Right?
again.
Right. So, Lonnie, we think so often about the role of government, which is inevitably inadequate. Government is never going to solve every one of these problems. There's got to be some kind of expanded role for grassroots organizations, generous donors, people who just care enough to get involved. Talk a little bit about the importance of those non-governmental efforts.
That's probably the only way it's going to be fixed, is service organizations like the Elks, like Lions, like Rotary, like Kiwanis, Knights of Columbus. These are the organizations that need to come together and make the difference. Just people caring about people. I think that a lot of the vets and a lot of people we support, okay, we had enough at the VA, but does people care about us? What do my neighbors think? And I think that will ultimately be the difference maker in this whole community.
So what is it that those private and nonprofit organizations can do that the government can't? Is it the human touch that you're talking about?
Absolutely. It's telling people they care just for the sake of caring. And I've seen some programs as an organization. The Elks does something called a Welcome Home Kit that we do together with them, and we bring some of the essential, bring in the measuring cups. We talk about the simple things. Wow, I didn't think about how important that was to measure, a cup of milk into the pancakes I'm trying to make for breakfast. It's really the human touch, and I think that's what's going to ultimately make the difference. I don't want to pick on the government too much. They do as much as they can. They're struggling. They're cutting back people. But this is one group. It's one part of the population. It makes no sense to put the word veteran and homeless in the same sentence. But inevitably, we're doing that. It makes no sense. It makes no sense for my organization to exist. I should not have to be here. I should not have to hand somebody a pair of underwear. It makes no sense. But I have to do it until somebody else solves these issues.
Yeah. But so let me ask you this, though. Even so, even if we acknowledge that there are many things that are going to bubble up from the private sector, there are times where government has to play a role. Say you're trying to build housing, right? And there's a zoning battle that you need. So the local town is being giving you a hassle. You got to get some support from various other aspects of the government. Is that difficult for those organizations to work together? What can we do to make sure that they're both all pulling in the same direction?
Nobody talks anymore. Government's not talking to the independent organizations. The independent organizations aren't talking to government. We had donors several years ago that wanted us to build some housing out here in Long Island. And based on zoning laws, based on sewage laws and groundwater, we just was turned away on every place we went to. But I was recently at a meeting. It was a lot of legislators, a lot of political elected officials were there. Nobody talks. So even the VA is not talking to me and saying, hey, can you help with this? Nobody talks. Everybody's so worried about what everybody else is thinking about. Nothing's getting done. This housing issue throughout the country is so important. Veteran population in this country is somewhere between 2 and 5%. I hear different answers all the time. But the veteran homelessness rate is somewhere between 15 and 25%. So why is it so proportionally so much higher? Because they experience some crazy stuff. You and I become best friends. We're fighting together in Afghanistan. We're really close. We rely on each other. We have each other's six, which is the back all the time. We're very close. We're like brothers. But something happens to you, and you're kind of vaporized in front of me. You think I'm going to be okay? You think I can come back and say, okay, let's go to Yankee games again? You see behind me, I'm a big Yankee fan. How do you come back and how do you heal from that? Peer-to-peer programs, talking. And then when you get that apartment, when you get that location, it's not the four walls. It's not the four walls. It's not the four walls. How do we make them feel that they are worth living in that location? How do we turn it into a home?
Yeah. Well, let me throw that back at you on the way out here. I mean, if you could change one thing about the way we deal with housing and vets that would actually make a practical difference, where we could see results, we could throw resources at it, but we could actually see some payback from that, what would be the one thing you would want to do?
Have a dedicated department, either under some organization. We're not that big. We get a lot done with a little bit of money, but we do a lot. Have a dedicated department to help with follow-up, to help with social care, help with psychological care once they're there. Because you know what? I've rehoused 3 veterans in the past 5 years. They get their own apartment. It could be in a nice place, but they're on their own. Guess what? 6 months later, they just move out into the woods again. Then they go back into the shelter systems. You see the names. My wife does all. It's us. It's personal. Oh my
Yeah.
God, I can't believe this person's getting his own apartment again.
Well, I don't want to leave you on a pessimistic, bummed out note. I mean, is there
No.
something that gives you hope in all this process?
Oh, you know what? It's people like us having this conversation. I sometimes feel all alone because I'm going to get in the truck tomorrow and I'm going to drive to Jersey. But having the opportunity to talk about this, and I know I talk too much. I so much apologize for tonight because you guys are going, what the hell's the matter with this guy? See, shut up. Let's talk about it, right? Isn't that the thing? We talk about everything else.
Well, we
We don't
believe
talk
in
about
that.
this.
We believe in that, right? The solutions are going to come from smart people talking with each other and trying
I'm
to
not that smart. I just want
figure
to get the
out.
job done. So,
Well, Lonnie Sherman's with General Needs, founder, and it's not just one of these up in the sky organizations out there are running around dealing with people one by one by one and solving what is not just, we talk about housing, but it is an interdisciplinary challenge that includes maybe it's the start, but it includes a whole lot of other things. Lonnie, real good of you to spend this time with us. I appreciate it. Yeah.
thanks, guys.
Bye
That was
bye.
fun.
Yeah. In this program, we have presented to you some of the most creative, forward-looking voices from around the globe, people focused on housing in new and creative ways. I'd like to think that we have shared some ideas that might spark your own creativity and invite you into these conversations as we wrestle with these life-changing and frankly, perplexing issues. But in all these conversations, one question keeps coming up over and over again. I suspect you might have noticed it. And that question is, what's government going to do about all of this? What role can government play to help these issues be resolved, not to stand in the way, to unite people in creative solutions, to help us all stay on the track and take wild and creative ideas and turn them into practical results. So I thought it might be useful to bring into the conversation someone who is right in the middle of that process of establishing government policy around these very perplexing housing issues that we have benefited so much from having these creative thinkers join us and share their own views on. How do we take them from those great ideas to the practical realities of life? Kwame O'Farrow serves in the New York State Assembly, representing the 11th Assembly District, which is in Suffolk County in the suburbs of New York City. A fairly diverse area, some fancy areas, some struggling areas, and I think offers a perspective on an issue like this, the nuts and bolts work of the role of government. Assemblyman, good of you to join us.
Good afternoon or good evening.
Did I characterize that right? We can talk about all these creative ideas, but a whole lot of them never get started until government plays a productive role. Why do you think this issue is so important?
Well, let's look at the landscape right now when we talk about New York State. We're in a crisis right now. We're in an affordability crisis. We're in a housing crisis. And quite honestly, we play a huge role. When I say we, meaning the government. At the end of the day, we look at our constituents. They're the ones that voted for us to do something about it. And it's time that we do something about it.
No, there are 1,000 issues, obviously, representing the people of the 11th Assembly District that you can focus on any day or any week. But you have put housing very much at the top of your list. Why do you think it's so important?
Because this is what my constituents are telling me. We have an affordability crisis. If we cannot afford our food, what makes you think we can afford a house to raise our families in? Now, I have the ability to have both sides of the coin. I grew up in an apartment building in Brooklyn, so I didn't know what it was like to have a house. And now my family and I, we are raising our family in a house. And even with that being said, it's very challenging to not just for us to stay in the house, but to keep afloat of our rising costs. We're talking about inflation. But what about those people that don't have the opportunity, don't have the financial capital to even purchase a house or to stay in a house? What is our role as government officials, and what are we going to do about it? How do we streamline the process to make sure that it works for everyone? We're talking about community private organizations. We are talking about realty companies. We're talking about builders. and we're talking about government. We all play a vital role in housing. And how do we do that? We have to do it effectively, coming together and thinking outside the box on ways on how we can streamline the process.
So one of the reasons I was excited to talk to you is that the district that you represent does include a lot of diversity. Sometimes people hear Suffolk County, they think the Hamptons and the Richie Riches out at the far east end. But I mean, even in places like Babylon and Huntington and Brookhaven and in Dix Hills, Northport, some of the communities that you look after, am I right? There's a lot of different kind of needs there, aren't there?
No, absolutely. And I will tell you, from being a young Brooklyn man growing up in Brooklyn, we thought everybody in Long Island had money because if you have a house, you're rich. That's not rich. Yes. Can you gain wealth from a house? Absolutely, 100%. Back in the day, we have two-parent households, many of us, who are working 9 to 5, traveling, commuting, so that we can raise our family in an affordable, safe community. So very diverse is District 11, and which is wonderful because we have so many different people coming from so many different backgrounds who bring a lot to the table. And I think that's what makes the 11th district so great.
That's it. So as you hear from your constituents about these issues, is it affordability that you hear about? Is it complaints about taxes? Is it wondering how I'm going to be able to find anywhere to live? What specific things are they asking you about?
I think, again, when we talk about affordability, we talk about everything. We talk about property taxes, we talk about inflation, we talk about the price of gas. That all rolls into one. But many of us are homeowners. And it's very, very difficult because even the younger people that live out here in Long Island and second and third generation Long Islanders are finding it very, very difficult to own a home in Long Island. So it's affordability, it's housing, it's one and the same. Because if you're not able to afford in a house, how can you afford anything else?
So let me describe to you a scenario, and you tell me if this sounds familiar to you. I have many friends who have reached the age that they have young grown children, right? Kids are coming out of school, getting ready to start their lives, 20s, 30s, some as old as their 40s. And many of them are finding it tremendously difficult to establish their own housing. I can't tell you how many kids I know in their 30s and 40s still living in their mom and dad's basement or in the spare bedroom or sometimes even in the childhood bedroom that they grew up in. Those kids want nothing more than to find their own homes, and they're finding that a tremendously difficult leap. Is that something you hear much of?
I hear that all the time. And I'll be honest with you, what we're looking at is how can we make housing more affordable for all New Yorkers, not just Long Island, for all New Yorkers. And how do we do that? How do we accomplish that? And I think what's great is we can harness AI, we can harness technology. I think that when you look on a global scale, what other countries are doing to build foundation, build affordable housing, or even think about modular housing, something that's sustainable, something that's great for the environment, something that's affordable, that we can start people, young people that move into, build some equity, and then perhaps move on to other housing options. I think, again, it's incumbent upon us to figure out the best way to do this.
Yeah, now I can just hear those conversations, though. I bet you've got some single-family homeowners and people in some of those subdivisions who said, hold on a second. I don't want a lot of multifamily dwellings, and I don't want tenement buildings near me. I want nice, big lots with people whose houses look just like mine. There's a culture clash there sometime, isn't there?
Sure. No, absolutely. But I think, again, we have to think about how can we better serve the community at large, those that are looking for housing, affordable housing. I think we all have a responsibility as human beings to think about our neighbors and think that how we can get people off the street and get them somewhere where they can build some type of equity, somewhere they can build community. But again, there's other parts to this. There's different dynamics. We have to make sure that we build affordable housing, but it has to be safe housing, has to be sustainable. We have to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to live in a home. Many of us have never lived in a home before, find it very challenging. And I think also, too, we have to educate our constituents, educate everybody within New York State and how important it is to own a home.
Mm-hmm. So in a series of conversations with some of the most creative and forward-thinking experts in various aspects of the world of housing, we've tried to address these issues from a wide variety of perspectives. But Assemblyman, that's important, isn't it? I mean, people come at these things from different directions, from different corners of the globe, with different political outlooks and attitudes. But isn't it vital that we somehow bring all those people together into some kind of consistent whole?
I agree, and I think that's what makes America great is that we have so many different cultures and so many different ideas and experiences, and bringing those individuals to the table for the betterment of humanity. This is not just a District 11 issue. This is not a New York State issue. This is not a United States issue. This is a global issue, and we are at a crisis right now, and we need to do something about it and do something about it right now.
And we need some forward-looking leaders to keep us pointing in that direction, willing even to work with people across the aisle and with different viewpoints than their own. Am I right?
Absolutely. Listen, I'm in the state legislature, and everyone knows that the Democrats are the majority. I work with the Republicans. I work across the line to benefit my constituents. Those are the people that voted for me. And then there is many people that didn't vote for me, but I still represent them in Albany. And I think that's what's important and key is us working across the aisle, but at the same time being respectful of our ideas and our experiences.
So we keep hearing this term workforce housing, which I guess is just another way of saying that there are people who we need to have working in a certain area, and so often they have trouble finding the money to live in that area where they work, and that there's some responsibility to make sure that if we're going to have the employees that we need, they got to live somewhere. How does that equation fit into what we're talking about?
I think that presents its own problem within itself. And again, we need to be able to train the workforce properly so that they are able to, make enough wages so that they can live in a household. And I'll give you a prime example. It's, project labor agreements is something that we've been championing, many of my colleagues, and trying to get a workforce within our communities that are working on public schools and building schools, right? And producing
Okay.
a labor force, but right here within Long Island, people that live within our district and providing with the trade. And I think that's very important. We kind of missed that point is, okay, yes, we can do workforce development. We can train our people, but let's give them some skills that they can use moving forward. Something that can grow their families, something that can boost the local economy. I think that's what's important.
So, we do often, I think, when we had these conversations, we divide it into little piles. We talk about the role of the private sector and what developers are doing, right? And then we talk about the community needs and the community desires. And then we also, in another bucket, sometimes we talk about the role of government. I am seeing instances now more and more where those different groups are trying to figure out how they can work together in a way that will produce more efficient results. Is that just pie in the sky, or can that really work, do you think?
No, I think honestly it can work. And I think New York State is very resilient and we've always faced challenges. And I think when you bring those three different sectors together, I think that we have a lot that we could bring to the table. And again, and I mentioned this earlier, when we talk about government, streamlining the process, making it a little bit easier, right, for people, for affordability, people to purchase houses. Let's take away some restrictions and allow builders to build these institutions, these places where people worship, where people live, where people work, and people play. I think that's what's important. It's not pie in the sky. We think that government cannot work with anyone else but government. That is not true. And I'm here to tell you, as an elected official, it's someone that the people believed in to do the job, is that we are working very, very hard to bring everyone to the table so that we can meet the needs of our constituents and the residents of New York State.
Yeah, so it's interesting. So I love to hear what are some practical things we could do to advance it. I mean, you alluded a moment ago to the idea of regulations, maybe zoning. Is some of this zoning just so tight that it makes it difficult to build the kind of housing that we need? What would be practical things that the legislature or the governor's office or even some of the local officials could do that would actually make some of this housing reality in bigger numbers?
So, to answer your question, and before I answer that question, we have to think about things in a larger scheme. When we talk about building
Okay.
housing or affordable housing, any affordable housing, we have to think about infrastructure, right? Because now when we do that, we're inviting more people to come out to Long Island, which we would love, and some people not too fond of that because more traffic, more cars, et cetera, et cetera. But we have to make sure we have the infrastructure in place. We have to make sure that Long Island itself is sound, that we can actually take on more vehicles and more people living in Long Island. And that money has to come from the state and has to come from the federal government. So sometimes I don't like to put the cart before the horse, but let's try to build out infrastructure so that we can sustain that. The second part is, and you alluded to that, is the zoning. Is can we rezone industrial areas, right, so that we can build affordable housing or housing, in general. And I think we can do that. I think it's incumbent upon the state, even sometimes the federal government and local municipalities to come together and say, let's do this. This is something that we can do and we can work on. But that's going to take funding. It's going to take time. But again, once again, when we talk about all these parties involved, we can get that done because we know what's necessary for Long Island to thrive and continue.
We've been talking a lot about your area on Long Island and New York State, which is understandable because those are the daily battles that you were involved in. But do you think these things apply more broadly? I mean, are the issues that lessons you guys are learning in New York, how do those apply to other parts of the United States or maybe even around the world? Are there some themes there, do you think?
I think there are some themes, and let's be honest, New York is unique. New York is
Well,
a
it's
fantastic.
tough. It's tough.
It
It's
is tough.
expensive, right?
It is tough. It's expensive. We are New Yorkers. We weather the storm. But I think, again, we need to continue to focus on what's important and how can we do that. But it's not to a point where we can't learn from others. We can't learn from California. We can't learn from Chicago or even globally. So when we look globally, what are other countries doing that we can look at and say, you know what? I think that's a great idea. Well, let's reach out to them and see how they were able to do it. But remember, again, New York is unique. So we may be able to take a little bit, a piece of what we learn over here, over in Europe, or maybe Africa, South Africa, or wherever throughout the United States, and see how that can work for New Yorkers.
Yeah. Now, I know in your own background, I mean, you were in the military, you served as a police officer. Were there lessons that you learned in those parts of your life that apply to any of this? I mean, the military certainly has its own view of housing, right?
Sure, sure. When we talk about the military is unique. Military tends to provide for, pretty much all the active duty members and their spouses and their families, and they're able to provide financial support for them to go on to purchase a home, whether it's a co-op or a condo or anything of that matter. I mean, for me, it's always been discipline. It's always have that attitude to focus on what's important, move forward and get the job done. But then again, work with every parties involved and how can we put our brains together to achieve our goal. And that's one thing about the military is that you have to have discipline. And we understand that there is a goal that we must achieve. And how do we achieve that goal? And we achieve that goal for every member of service. And it's the same thing here, even in the police department. When I was responsible for protecting 8.5 to 9 million people in New York City, is how do we able to bridge that gap, right? How do we have open dialogue and constructive conversation to better learn and prepare our workforce? And that workforce is NYPD. How are we able to better serve New Yorkers and those that are coming from abroad to either learn, live, and work and play? And again, time and time again, I think we rose to the challenge and we were able to be productive.
Because, it strikes me that many of the problems that police officers, particularly in urban places, but I suppose it applies in smaller communities as well, face in their day-to-day work really does have a housing component to it. If somebody doesn't have a stable housing situation, I have to believe they're more crime prone, they're more vulnerable to the sort of the pressures of the street. I don't know how though it's hard to put into words exactly how all those things interact with each other. But am I wrong in thinking that there's a connection between all those things?
Absolutely. I think there's always a connection. And when we look at, housing, particularly in New York City, it's difficult. You don't have that much property to really build. We have to think about our communities, right? So when you look at someone is looking to purchase a house, we will always look at the neighborhood. We always want to look at crime statistics. We want to know if it's a walkable distance, if there's mass, transportation. So it also presents its own initial challenges. And again, I say that those people, when they invest in themselves when they invest in buying a home. They know that they can raise their family safely in those neighborhoods and know that they can, potentially pass it down from generation to generation and build some type of financial wealth.
So when a constituent comes to you and say, Mr. Assemblyman, you know all these ins and outs and stuff. You're in there dealing with this stuff every day. Should I buy a home? Should I make that investment? It's expensive, it's challenging, it's risky. I don't know if the value is going to go up or down. I don't know what's going to happen with the economy. I'm sure you must get people who seek your advice on that sort of thing.
Indeed they do. And I will tell many people, and I try to be as frank as possible. We think about the housing market, right? Has always continuously outperformed the stock market. Many of my constituents may not be very interested in the stock market, but I tell them down the line, yes, we go through ups and downs. So that's anytime you invest in anything, you're going to have highs and lows. But one thing is about the housing market, it always stood the test of time. And that has been proven day in and day out.
Yeah, I guess it's easier to live in a house than in a stock or a bond too. If even if it goes down, you might have somewhere to sleep. So before I get you out of here, I want to get you to look into the future a little bit. And I know we all have cloudy crystal balls here. But what is a reasonable expectation that people should have about the role of government in trying to make housing more accessible, more affordable, more sustainable for people? I don't think anybody thinks you guys in Albany or in the other state capitals of America are going to snap your fingers and solve these problems overnight. But what do you think is a reasonable expectation that we should have of our political leaders? What can we expect from you guys?
Well, you can expect many of us and my colleagues like myself that work sometimes 27 hours a day, and mind you, only 24 hours in a day, that we're trying to get to the bottom of it and find the best way that we can meet the needs of our constituents. I will say that the state is doing a fairly good job at trying to create affordable housing throughout the entire state. There are projects that are underway. Many I can't speak of yet until it becomes an announcement. But there are going to be some great things coming in the future when it comes from New York State and housing in total.
Yeah, because when we look at the politics just recently, that whole question of people being able to afford their daily lives seems to be, maybe you know this better than I do, but seems to be really the most pressing, most emotional, and frankly, most politically effective issue right now. Am I right?
Absolutely. That is top number one thing on our agenda is affordability and housing, without a doubt. And I would say probably in the same sentence or right next to each other, adjacent to each other, as public safety. But the biggest thing that I'm hearing in my district is affordability. People cannot afford their rent. They cannot afford to put gas in their car to go to work. They cannot afford sometimes clothes for themselves. And this is an affordability issue. And if they can't do that, then they cannot stay at home. And I had a meeting today with a nonprofit organization that works very, very hard to keep people inside their homes. And I just want my constituents of District 11 to know that that is a priority for me to ensure that we continue to make things affordable and provide the services that we need to keep people inside their homes.
Kwame O'Farrell, a member of the United States Assembly, representing a district on Long Island, Suffolk County, east of New York City. A diverse group of people with a whole lot of different needs, trying to navigate and putting housing right at the top of the list. Listen, it's very good of you to spend this time with us. I very much appreciate your perspective on these issues.
Well, you're very welcome, and I appreciate you. Thank you for your time and hosting me.
You see what I mean? Sustainable futures. That wraps up our series of conversations today. We're so happy to have had you join us as we explore some of these very perplexing problems. And nobody calls them easy, but the only way we know how to get our hands around them at the Global Housing Foundation is to gather together some of the most creative minds in the world and pull from them. Hey, what can we do? What are the smart people thinking right now? What are the solutions out there that are actually working? So we're gathering folks from South Dakota to Boston, from Uganda to Canada, and frankly, anywhere else we can find them. We're committed to trying to make these solutions practical, doable, and real. So what about you? Are you willing to help? We certainly need it here. Whether that's a donation of financial type, whether it's a volunteering of your time, you could become one of our ambassadors at the Global Housing Foundation. For details on all of that, just follow one of the websites now on the screen. We certainly need your help. We appreciate your help, and we are so happy that you have joined us today. I'm Ellis Hennigan for the Global Housing Foundation, saying, let's go make some good housing out there. What do you say?